meeting of the Spencer Trust. 4 of 5 of the trustees are present. And the only item on our agenda is to discuss and act on approval of funding for a contract position to administer the Spencer Trust Fund. Phil, would you like to take us through that agenda item?
Lisa might have one or two things to add, but this would give authorization of $30,000 to hire a consultant. That would be a contract position. This person would administer the Spencer Trust programs under Teresa's supervision in planning, building, and resilience. The consultant will be responsible for processing applications for Spencer Trust assistance, including home repair, ADA accessibility projects, emergent fund projects, and assisting with promoting these programs and coordinating with East Bay Community Action Program. And we would intend to put out an RFP for this position this week. Okay. So hopefully be able to hire that person in November.
And would Deborah Page Trim continue to serve that role until the person was hired?
She's been serving that role and she will help with that transition. Yep.
Okay. Any questions?
So Phil, how much was did the Spencer Trust get charged for Deborah's time? I mean, I know she only worked part-time there. I'm not asking for the total. Just
I think it was about 22 or 23.
Okay.
Yeah. And we've expanded that program to include emergent funds and crisis funds and more for home repair. So it's been actually a larger. The scope has expanded since Deborah was funded at that level.
I think our charitable requests were about 90,000 before, and now we're almost up to $250,000.
Yep, about 250.
Yeah, and so the role has expanded. Any other questions from trustees?
Yeah, when you say hire in November, that would go through trustee approval?
It would be advertised. We hopefully have somebody for a recommendation by November. So that's our intent. That's our schedule.
I just wanted to clarify because just so we can do our due diligence.
Yep.
Okay.
But we would just do the approval. The hiring process comes out of the plan.
We would handle administratively. Yeah.
Questions? Anyone want to make a motion?
Motion to approve the hiring of a contract employee for Spencer Trust Administrator in an amount not to exceed $30,000.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, first and second. Any other discussion?
Can we amend that to say that to be hired with council approval at the November meeting, or would that?
Or then it.
I don't know if would it be necessarily.
Is it necessary?
I think we can just say with council approval, and I'll accept that. I don't.
Okay, with council approval.
Right. I should say with trustee.
Trustee, right. Sorry.
So I'll amend it to say with trustee approval.
I'll second the amendment.
Further discussion?
No.
Okay. I just want to quickly say that we did expand the scope of the trust significantly, and I appreciate that Deborah Page Trim has really stepped up and been a community liaison and has provided incredible recommendations. And I think she has big shoes to fill for the person coming in, and I'm glad she's sticking around for the transition. So,
If I could second a comment, I would.
all right. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, and 1 absent. And if there is no further business with the Spencer Trust,
Move to adjourn the Spencer Trust meeting.
Second that.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 4 approved, 1 absent.
Good evening. I'm calling this meeting of the Barrington Town Council to order at 7:08 p.m. 4 members of the council are present. 1 member of the council, Councilor Breyer, has informed us that they will be a bit late for this meeting. So we expect Councilor Breyer to be joining us in just a few minutes. This is a hybrid meeting, which means that we have some people live and there are some people who are joining us by video. For the folks who are joining us by video, if there is a time when you want to make a comment, try to raise your hand by looking at the bottom of the screen. We'll try to recognize that. We have a couple of things on our agenda. First of all, we have a place on our agenda that we deal with public comment. That's for anything that is not already on the agenda. So if folks have something they want to discuss that they know is on the agenda, you should just wait until that part of the agenda comes up. If people have something that is not on the agenda they want to raise, you can do it at that point when we have the public comment. The other thing is that we have on our agenda to discuss the Zion Bible campus property. I wanted to just, because in case folks were here specifically for that, I wanted to sort of set expectations. It's on for discuss. We are not here to act because for the most part, we can't act on that. But I wanted to have our town solicitor just bring folks up to speed at this point so you understand if you're here to talk about that and you don't think a demolition permit should be issued, we can explain what that means. Mike?
More than happy to do so, Mr. Chairman. Some good news is that the attorney for the owners of the property has agreed that no demolition at all will take place prior to a meeting between town officials. That would include our town manager, myself, the attorney, and a representative of the owner of the property. That meeting will most likely take place within the next 2 to 3 weeks. It hasn't been set yet, but you can rest assured that in the meantime, there will be no such demolition. We've received many emails from many individuals who are very concerned. We acknowledge that concern. We will do everything we can to try to reach some kind of an agreement with the owners to preserve Barrington Court, if that is at all possible. But again, in the meantime, there will be no demolition. So, and I will certainly be reporting back to the council. Phil and I will be reporting back subsequent to the meeting and give you an update.
Great. Thank you. We will, again, that will be a part of our agenda, but I just wanted to set expectations for that. We don't have the power to stop a demolition permit, but fortunately, we certainly have the ability to negotiate with the owner.
Yes, we do. And you are right. Legally, because the town does not have a historic district, there is no such ordinance in the town of Barrington, and Barrington Court, although it is on the National Register of Historic Places, that designation does not protect it from any of the statutes that are in place here in Rhode Island with regard to historic places. Those, there are many, many buildings throughout the country, of course, in Rhode Island with that designation, but unless the building or the structure is within a designated historic district, there are no such protections. So again, our main strategy going forward would be negotiation. And again, I'm happy to say negotiations will take place.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is our Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd ask you all to join me in standing for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We are also reading from a land acknowledgement at each of our regular town council meetings. So I'll read from that. Akine, peace. We recognize the unique and enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. We acknowledge that we are in the ancestral homeland of the Pokanoket tribe, within the original territory of the Pokanoket Nation. We commit to ongoing efforts to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Pokanoket people whose ancestral lands and water we benefit from today. Akine, peace. Next item on our agenda is announcements, and I'll ask our town manager, Phil Hervey, to take us through that.
Thanks, President Carroll. The town is still interested in seeing more people volunteer if there's interest out there in participating in the Barrington Day of Caring on Monday, this coming Monday, October 10th, from noon to 4 p.m. There's a form online that you can sign up, where you can sign up as a volunteer, or you can sign up on the day of the Day of Caring at town hall. The town is interested in seeing if anybody's interested in volunteering for the community emergency response team, which is a group of volunteers that will help the town with disaster preparedness and emergency situations. The contact for that is Norm Menard. His email is on this agenda. On Saturday, October 8th, is an event celebrating the life of Elizabeth Bonnie Warren at the Crescent Park Loop Carousel on Bullocks Point Avenue in Riverside. That's from 10 a.m. to noon on Saturday. On Wednesday, October 12th, is a dedication of Robert Faulkner at the Peck Center at 4 p.m. On Saturday, October 15th, is the Great Pumpkin Harvest Festival, sponsored by the town's recreation department. That's from 1 to 3:15 p.m. at the Town Hall campus. On Saturday, October 15th, is the Barrington Christian Academy 5K road race from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. There are a series of candidate forums that are listed on this agenda that please check it out. They're sponsored by the League of Women Voters. This is for Senate, House, and Town Council and school committee candidates. The early voting for the November 8th general election it starts on October 19th and runs through November 7th. At 4 p.m. on November 7th is the end of early voting. There is a community shred at Public Works on Saturday, October 22nd from 9 a.m. to 11:30. The Trot Off Your Turkey at St. Luke's School is on Saturday, November 26th from 9:30 to 11:30. And the tree planting and removal update for this month is for the period of September 1st, 2021 through August 31st, 2022. 71 trees were removed and 91 trees were planted. That's it for announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Hervey. The next series of items on our agenda are what we call the consent agenda, and they are typically non-controversial and will be passed by a single motion. There won't be a separate discussion on these items unless a council member or citizen so requests, and the request is for good cause, in which event the item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered in the normal sequence on the agenda. Is there anything that any member of the council would like to remove from the consent agenda for separate discussion? Yes.
Just want to remove agenda item number 5, not for discussion, but just to abstain from that vote.
Okay. Any others? Okay. Any member of the public wish to remove anything from the consent agenda for separate discussion? Yes.
Yes, could you remove my letter to the town council?
In acknowledged correspondence. Okay, sure. Phil, is there anyone online who is raising their hand, wants anything discussed separately?
I see no hands raised.
Okay. So let's start with item 5. This is accepting the resignations of 2 folks who have served our committees quite well, and we're grateful for their service. I make a motion to accept the resignations as presented.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
So there are 3 in favor, 1 abstention, and 1 absent. We will now deal with item 11, which is to acknowledge correspondence. And Ms. Holloway would like to highlight her letter to the council or discuss it separately. Could you come forward to the microphone, please?
Yes, thank you so much. So thank you so much, President Carroll and members of the Barrington Town Council. My name is Susanna Holloway. I live at 64 Fales Avenue in Barrington. So I wrote you all to explain my complaint that I had not been allowed to attend the one in-person community workshop forum that the school committee and the school building committee hosted back in May. And I outlined in my letter to you that I tried very hard to do exactly what they told me the school building committee told everybody they had to do if they wanted to go to that. So I went to the April 7th meeting of the school building committee and I asked in person at their public comment time, and you can see that reflected in the minutes of that meeting. I asked to be able to attend the May workshop session. And during that school building committee meeting on April 7th, Gina Bay and members of the school building committee said that they wanted members of the Committee on Appropriations to be able to attend the May workshop. So I had no reason to believe that there was going to be a problem and that I wouldn't be allowed to attend. But in an abundance of caution, I also asked during the public comment part. Then there was a notification that people who wanted to attend would have to apply in writing. So even after April 7th, I applied in writing to the school administration who was handling the people who were coming, asking to be able to attend. And then I thought I had dotted my I's and crossed my T's. I didn't need to do anything else. And then I got a letter, an email letter back from the superintendent, Mike Masori, saying he was very sorry, but there was no room for me to be able to attend. I just find this outrageous. I personally feel that this committee workshop was represented to be something that the public could attend. In my layperson's understanding, I just immediately thought it was a public meeting, and I was horrified that members of the public were not allowed to attend. Other Barrington voting residents who applied in writing also received a letter saying there was no room for them, they could not come. So that was my first gut reaction was, what the heck? And if you are limited by space and can't have members of the public, host another one. This was in May. The final vote was taken by the school committee in August. There was plenty of time to have another one. The other reaction I had was, what the heck? Gina Bay and the school building committee had said they wanted members of the Committee on Appropriations, and I am the vice chair. So when I asked in person and when I asked in writing, I just find it wrong to basically have the door shut in my face for no reason other than that for whatever reason, there wasn't room that day. So I would just ask you, please, you are all part of this application for necessity of school construction. You are a part of it. You, as well as the school committee, in tandem are doing this. So when one falls down, and I would submit that the school committee and the school building committee were wrong to deny me and other members of the public the ability to go to a community forum to discuss the options that were being presented on the table. One of those which was then picked. They were wrong to deny us that opportunity to go. And I am saying it is also your responsibility. If they denied us, could you please host some community forums where the public can come and discuss the school building plans. These are huge school building plans. These school building plans, option 2B, contemplates tearing down some of our local small elementary schools and building 2 new big centralized facilities that would hold upwards of 600 students, and redistricting and moving kids around and busing and potentially establishing a whole new early learning center that we do not have. These are huge changes. So I'm just really begging you to please take some control over this process and let members of the community be heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions.
Thank you.
President Carroll, there's one hand that just came up online on Zoom.
Okay. Is it Isla? Isla? If we can.
Hi, that's actually my daughter's name. I apologize. It's from some remote learning. This is Erica Tuhig for Eleanor Drive. I would actually like to second what Susanna is speaking about tonight. I have also been to the majority of the school building meetings since I believe December or January of this year. I have been very involved in all of the community sessions. I'm putting that in quotation marks because it was just a presentation to us versus us being involved. I actually applied for the May session as well, along with many of the community members that I know in town who were not selected. So I would like to second that the community would really like to be involved in all of, not all of it, but some of the decision making, or at least give feedback. We have not been allowed to give feedback. And if we have, it was shut down and told that this was a presentation and not a discussion. So I would really just like you to know that it's not just Susanna who is really, really upset about this.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to orient us, Councilor Breyer came in during the comments, and I wanted to give you an opportunity. Was there anything on the consent agenda that you wanted to remove for separate discussion? We've already voted on item 5 separately, but is there anything else?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, so with that, I will ask if there is a motion to approve the consent agenda items 6 through 12 as presented.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Great. We do not have any interviews and appointments for this meeting. Item 14, discuss and act on evaluating the financial town meeting by implementing a committee. We had discussed this last week, but our town manager wanted to take some time to really look into this. So I think we left it to Phil to kind of tell us where he wanted to go. I think the suggestion had been forming a managers committee.
Just the public comment was.
Oh, did I skip public comment?
Between the two, yeah.
Oh,
Sorry about
forgive me. We'll come back to
Okay.
this. Thanks, Phil. This part of the agenda is public comment. This is a maximum of a 3-minute statement for members of the public to speak regarding a topic that is not already on the agenda. If you want to speak, please indicate by raising your hand, either online or here. When you're recognized, please state your name and residency for the record. Is there anyone present who would like to be heard for public comment? Okay, seeing none. Is there anyone online?
No hands are raised.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item. 14, evaluating the financial town meeting by implementing a committee. Phil, can you tell us what you've looked at since the last meeting?
I reached out to the town solicitor for input on the possible formation of a committee that would be basically a study committee to provide information, research the issue of different options for budget approvals other than the financial town meeting, and the input from the solicitor is that that committee, even if formed by the town manager, would likely have to be subject to open meetings. So all these agendas would have to get posted. The meetings would probably have to take place in the evening. So that was the feedback from the solicitor, but the solicitor also provided a lot of interesting background information on the financial town meeting and alternatives and what's been implemented in Rhode Island. So we already have kind of a head start on researching this topic. I was suggesting that rather than form a committee, that the administration use its capacity to conduct its own research and provide a report for the town council around May or June, probably June. What did I say? Maybe July. I don't know. But sorry, did I say July? So actually in June, for the July meeting, right? Sorry. So the reason was because not only the Open Meetings Act requirements, which would be a bit of a heavy lift, but also the people that would be involved in that study committee would be more than likely also involved in the budget process and the financial time meeting itself. And that is the time frame when all those meetings are happening. So that's an additional layer on top of what's already happening with the budget. So my suggestion would be to list out some potential research bullet items, is that the administration would work with the solicitor's office and also reach out to individuals for input to produce a report for June, posted on the website, and then make that available for public review for a few weeks in advance of the town council meeting in July. That would be late July, be July 24th. Then that would lead into what normally would happen with the 10-year update of the town charters, that the town council would form a charter review commission in around September, if you adhere to the same schedule as last time. So this information would be available for that charter review commission when they launch into their meetings in that fall.
Okay. Council Breyer, this was your initiative.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think the administration handling kind of the initial lift of this and then making something that's usable for the Charter Review Commission makes a lot of sense. I think one thing I'd like to see added to how it's conducted is to start with a survey. We're going to hear shortly about the Complete Streets survey and how successful that was.
Okay.
I think it would be really great to have a survey that goes out to hear from the town. What are the parts of the budget process that you'd like to see changed? What are the parts that you want to keep? And what ideas do you have about how to fix it? And then we can blend that with the work that the solicitor's office has already done in terms of what's going on in Rhode Island and in New England. And the Charter Review Commission and or council at the time can take it from there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, if the administration can handle it, I think that's better than setting up another committee and all the meetings. And
How different? I think that's a great idea to solicit some input in terms of a survey. Are you suggesting just that the administration kind of figure out, excuse me, what to ask, or is that something you want to come before us again, or just something simple like, how do you think our budget process can be improved, and then?
Yeah, I envision it as just a couple questions that I'm sure the administration can come up with. And if that survey goes out and the council at the time thinks, well, we need to find out other things, it could be handled then. But yeah,
Sure.
I can work.
Thanks.
That makes sense. So let's see.
Nobody else has anything. I'll make a motion to request the town manager to research alternatives to the financial town meeting and deliver a final report to the town council at the July 24th, 2023 meeting.
I'll second that, but we do have further discussion.
Oh,
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree with everything that's been said. The only thing I'd say is when we get into this with a final report, when we're getting that close to the Charter Commission, it would be helpful if we go not just, this is not just laying out what other communities are doing, but to actually talk about a structural process. For example, I kind of like the idea because I think it's more accessible to all people, whatever your personal situation is, to have a townwide budget vote. Were we to do that, what would be the mechanics of that? What would happen if the budget vote fails? What do towns typically do to that? So I'd like to go, if that report could go deep enough, if that's the plan, so that we understand going in, it's not just a vague concept of, well, some communities just have council approval, some communities only vote on the school budget, other communities, we need something to go deeper so the mechanics are laid out as to the common different models so that we're not caught in a situation in the summer going into charter review with a vague concept, where we actually know these are the mechanics of the system. So I would just note that that's not any way to amend a motion, but just that's kind of my thinking on that. I don't know, when you vision report, Phil, what do you think?
Well, just like you're saying, dig deeper in these different structures that have been put in place throughout the state and possibly other New England towns, and try to find some information about how well it's working. Most of that probably be through media accounts. And then maybe some maybe anonymous input we get from various towns, because sometimes people don't put their name on and criticize something that they're implementing in their own town. But so I think there's a way to dig deeper and kind of get at the heart of the various issues and what works, what doesn't work.
There was talk in the town manager memo about scholarly articles. Is there such research? Are there comparative studies out there?
Well, I know Peter Squires has done a lot of in my
office. Yeah,
he's done quite a bit.
We'll provide appendices. It won't just be a couple of pages of this is what's out there. We'll provide the background, and those appendices I would envision would have this structure. Exactly how it happened, step by step. I'm very familiar with what's happening in other towns without a financial town meeting, and I can assure you there are many, many steps. And the last step usually is if a certain number of residents of that town still desire a financial town meeting, they can sign a petition and request one. So we'll make sure it's all inclusive.
Well, there are ways to preserve the public aspects of the process that we like. One drawback is that we don't have a high participation rate. So if you are, as we talked about, if you're a single parent, if you work a certain shift where you can't attend, or maybe you have a health condition that doesn't allow you to sit there all night, this could still allow a broader participation. But we don't have to forego the amendment process. Those can be submitted in advance. And so get to that level of detail, which a lot of the time when we ask for things like this, it's sort of, you want a simple answer to a legal question. Here, I think you do have to go deeper in this report to talk about mechanically how this would work to preserve the things that really do serve the public interest in the public having its input in the process directly, as has been the tradition in Barrington. I don't think you want to make a change that necessarily circumvents the public. At least I wouldn't. I can't speak for anyone else. So that's why I'm asking for a sort of a detailed approach as to how we serve the amendment process and reflect that here, how we make sure we maximize participation, how we reflect that, and yet, at least it's my sense that we do need a change. And so I want to examine that. So we're not caught up in that at the last second.
And by the way, that sentiment would not be unique to Barrington.
Anyone who has changed their financial town meeting to something else has done so primarily to become more inclusive, not less inclusive. That's always been the goal, to have more public participation, which, as you say, the FTM, direct democracy, but the participation rate as a percentage of the whole town really doesn't even come close. So
I certainly don't mean to amend the motion. I'll support the motion. I want to make that perspective, Eric.
Okay, the motion's been made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Next item on the agenda is item 15, policy for community events and requests for funding. And I'll ask our town manager, Phil Hervey, to take us through that.
This item came up a number of months ago when we had a discussion about the waiver of police detail fees for a couple of events that happened, and that we needed a rural policy for considering town support for events that aren't necessarily that aren't hosted or organized by the town per se, but have a lot of the aspects that of a public event. And also in the intervening time that we actually have money dedicated for supporting community events, which could be town events as well, town sponsored events. The town council added $3,000 to this year's budget and was adopted at the financial town meeting. So it's in this year's budget. Plus, the town received $7,500 from Discover Newport for, quote, projects and programs that enhance the visitor's experience, unquote, in Barrington. The deadline for spending this Discover Newport funds is June 30th of 2023. So there's a lot of flexibility for how to spend that money. So if that would go toward a town event, that could help support or expand certain things like the Pumpkin Festival, which was announced in the announcements, or it could help support some privately organized and funded events that have a lot of the aspects of a public event. And a couple of those events are subject to a second part of this agenda item, which is a request to approve some funding to support a request from Brian Hoffman of the Barrington Business and Community Coalition to help offset some of the costs that the BBCA, not coalition, sorry, association, that the BBCA incurred in organizing and putting on the Wood Avenue Street Fair in July, which attracted hundreds of people. And the farmers markets held at St. John's Church toward the rear part of that property. The cost as detailed by the BBCA adds up to $1,794. Also, I have not received a formal request from Film Forward as anticipated, but I do not have a request from Film Forward. There's an outstanding bill for a police detail of $441.25. So the proposed criteria for considering funding from the town, including the Discover Newport funding, those criteria are outlined in that motion that's provided, including one, the organization requesting the funds is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. The event is free and open to the general public. The applicant has provided a complete detailed budget and has demonstrated it has sufficient funding in addition to town support to cover all costs related to the event, including police detail, application fees, etc. The group has a track record working cooperatively with the town, including meeting deadlines for submitting required paperwork. The town administration has determined the event will not adversely affect town operations or public safety. So those were the suggested criteria for considering funding for supporting future events. And then one request right now is from the BVCA for the $1,794. I was suggesting that could be considered startup money to help that event get off the ground, even that's looking in the past. So maybe a portion of that could be covered by this funding, which adds up to, we have $10,500 available for this kind of thing. So motion one is the criteria for evaluating these requests. Motion two is just to consider one request that we have in hand for the BBCA's events from this past summer.
Thank you. This was really helpful, I think. I think it's a good point that that it's so important to publicize this, to give people an opportunity, because there may be some great events out there, and if people don't know about this opportunity, they just won't apply. It'd be easy for us to kind of spend this money on just a few events if we didn't give sufficient advance notice, so that somebody who's got an event later in the year might want to say, I'm intending to hold this. I'd like some help with it. So this would just be to establish this criteria, but your suggestion is that that even with this criteria, there'd be publication and then it would come before the next town council
As we get requests.
as you get individual requests.
Unless you want to have it.
Maybe we
Certain.
could set a couple of times a year or something, because I guess what I'm concerned about is just folks not knowing about it yet. So we want to give some advance notice and then maybe 2 rounds of it, just a thought.
I would add that the town should also be thinking of how they might be able to utilize this funding for them, in particular, the Discover Newport funding. So that could be something that town also be part of the mix.
Right.
Is there any sense that this is it's almost at odds with itself in the sense that we set standards, which, then we could violate just because someone could come to us and say, well, this doesn't really meet the standards, but we'll do it anyway. And what's the purpose of the standards if every request would go before the council? I support the idea of actually setting standards. I'm not sure that we need to go through every single request, especially because with the success of something like what Mr. Hoffman's been doing, we'd like to do more of this. And we'd like to have more of these types of events, I think, of all different types of cultural events in town. And I worry a little bit about, how many requests we might get. And also, there may be an opportunity sometimes to do something worthwhile and well planned, but that wouldn't necessarily make it onto an agenda in time. And just some of which I think you're referring to when you're discussing that, President Carroll. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that. I almost wonder if we should go one way or the other. Just set the standards, and of course the council could review it, or you could refer something to the council if you felt that there was some ambiguity, or we should process each request, although I think that could bog down council meetings where you're looking at broader issues.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a last minute request, that could be a problem for the event itself. So almost disqualifies itself coming in so late. It's like next week, and now you need money. It's like,
Right, but the meetings are once a month.
Right.
And
Yeah.
sometimes in the summer, once during the
That's
summer.
true. You're slowed down in the summer.
A possible midpoint could be set the criteria for funding of $300, say, and if the event needs more support, then that would come before the council. And so the town could approve, let's say it's, 2 police detail. That's probably more than $300 right there, but, could approve something just by filling out the application and checking off the boxes, and town manager decides it's a worthwhile event. But if it's going to be more substantial, or if they're just starting out and have no money at all and need more, and they want to come before the council, so that way there isn't necessarily a deadline that they'd miss, but there's also not every request has to come before the council.
If I may, in other communities, that is what happens. And I've actually seen the number 500 because you can't do much with 300.
Yeah.
Yes, Vice President Hom.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that. I think Jacob's idea is a good one in terms of like a lower threshold. I mean, in my view, there aren't that many of these. I don't see this as something where there's going to be an opening of the floodgates of everybody's going to want to have a community event. I actually like the idea of the events coming before the council, even if just playing it out, maybe it's something that's on the consent agenda. For example, there's a lot of different 5Ks. I think there's one on I don't know if it was on the consent agenda or if it was in Phil's announcements, but we typically do see those to approve them for safety reasons, for budget reasons, if that ends up being an issue. I think there's value to it coming before the council for transparency purposes as well. And it's another form of publicity because it generates discussion about whatever the event is. And if it's a true community event, then that's a good thing. Or if it's a controversial community event, then that's something that should be discussed as well. So, I mean, I'm a bit indifferent in terms of whether we approve specific standards. I like these standards that are listed here, but I think they're all kind of self-explanatory. If we were to get something on our agenda tonight these are things that in my mind I'd be going through anyway. So do we need to commit them to record and commit them to a form of a policy or an ordinance? Or within our discretion, can we just continue to review them on a case-by-case basis? There'll be public comment at each of the meetings, and there'll be further discussion about whatever the events are. My hesitancy is just we don't know what we don't know. So who knows what type of event we might get? And if somebody might say, well, I meet all these 5 criteria, and if for whatever reason the council denies it, or if it doesn't meet, one of the items on this criteria, like number 4, for example, and I'm just cherry picking one, but a track record of working cooperatively with the town. But what if it's a new organization who hasn't worked with the town before? So I'd be hesitant to limit ourselves to this criteria. I think, if for example we are to put forth criteria, whether through an ordinance or another form, I would encourage language indicating that these are prerequisites, but it doesn't mean that just because you meet these prerequisites, the council shall vote or shall approve whatever the issue is. I think there should be some discretion because we don't know what projects are going to be before the council at any given point in the future. So just some food for thought. So as we further discuss this, keep that in mind.
I think that's a great idea. I'm just thinking of some language. Some contractual language, unfettered discretion, something like that.
There has to be some discretion in the sense that you may have events that you're concerned if you would the amount that you're spending to support the event be commensurate with the participation in the event. In other words, if you want to spend, you may spend a lot to put something on that has a very low attendance. Then again, you might spend a little for something that's a narrowly tailored event. It's a community event. It's free, but it's something more specific, maybe a small lecture or something like that. Something of that nature. And so there has to be some ambiguity in any standard. That standard should be, I think, included. And you would still want the standards to some degree, I would think, if you have the threshold idea that Council Pryor mentioned, which I think makes some sense for sure, because then it would limit the ones that we process. And yet, as far as publicity, we can always put them still on our announcements for any event in that way. But I feel in a way, if we're not going to do if we didn't do the threshold, then having standard, then I agree, as I was saying, I think having standards and yet having our individual approval are almost at odds with each other. And we're trying to bend everything into our standards one way or the other and come up with some formula. Now if in administering events, town hall needs that, those standards because we're setting the threshold, then I think that would make some sense to do it. I don't have really strong feelings either way. I like the points that were made across the board.
I think it's possible to include some criteria without carving them in stone that we can use to look at. But on the other hand, I don't want Dunkin' Donuts coming in and saying they want to hold Dunkin' Donuts Day and looking for money from us when it's clearly a commercial thing. Or I do think it's a good idea to sort of, if you're going to be charging for it, then you're going to have to handle that all on your own. Now, there might be an exception to that. I can't think of one right now, but I think we could have language that covers that. So in the proposed motion, where it says the following prerequisites and evaluation criteria, I would say among those for consideration in awarding community event funds for future events. And then, at the end, after 5, we could say awarding of such funds is in the unfettered discretion of the Barrington Town Council. So nobody thinks they're entitled to it. We very easily run out of money. And I think you're right. We don't have a great number of these yet. I'm hoping we get more. I'm hoping this budget item has to get bigger. I think that fair was great. I'd love to see a bunch of those, spring to fall. along with other things, is, as I think you mentioned, like a lecture, something small. Somebody wants to bring in a great speaker and there's some honoraria associated with that. They can do it at the library for nothing, but they have to pay for that. So maybe they suggest that. Things like that, I think, would be great for our community.
Yeah, some of them we're going to try and they're not going to succeed, but even something like the Barrington Soccer Tournament is going to bring a lot of people into town who are going to come to and see local businesses. And I know the EDC wants to see more of this. Mr. Hoffman's on the EDC. And so, this is something that they're pushing. They love to see more of it, just to have an awareness. The chair of the EDC always says we want to be a destination, not just a town people drive through on the way to Bristol and Newport, or Providence.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I realize we don't have a lot of these, but we certainly like more of them. And now we've had a few successes like that.
So with that language, would that be more acceptable to you?
Yeah, and I'm fine with the threshold. I think is I'm good with that if people want to do that. To give discretion below $500 if that's it, but I'm not set in stone.
So right now, the total amount that we are awarding, or we have the ability to award, is $7,500 because of that special Discover Newport award, and $3,000. So, maybe when it gets bigger, we would want to reduce the number of times people come before us, but I think we'll run out of $3,000 pretty quick. So my suggestion is just to have it for the town council in the initially, and then when it gets bigger, we could do it for $500 as Jacob, or $300 as Jacob suggested. But in the short run, $3,000 will disappear pretty quick. So I will make a motion to establish an application process for the following prerequisites and evaluation criteria. And Mary, I'm adding this language after the word criteria. Among those for consideration in awarding community event funds for future events.
Consideration in awarding.
And then go back to what the original says, which says awarding community event funds for future events. One, the organization requesting, and I'm just going to read these for the record, but one, the organization requesting the funds is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. Two, the event is free and open to the general public. Three, applicant has provided a complete detailed budget and has demonstrated it has sufficient funding in addition to town support to cover all costs related to the event, including police detail, application fees, etc. Four, the group has a track record of working cooperatively with the town, including meeting deadlines for submitting required paperwork. Five, the town administration has determined the event will not adversely impact town operations or public safety. And then I would add one sentence. Awarding of these funds is in the unfettered discretion of the town council.
I second that, but would like to tweak one of the language to something that Vice President Hum mentioned was actually something I was thinking about as well. And that would be for item number 4, rather than the group has a track record, the group does not have a poor track record working cooperatively with the town, etc. Reason being, I don't want a new organization or community member to read this and think, oh, because I haven't been around, I shouldn't even bother applying.
Yep. So that would be the group does not have a poor, and then it would go back to what it has.
Yes.
Do you have that, Mary? Okay, I would accept that amendment. With that amendment, will you second?
Yes.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. The next one, I think, we didn't have any criteria before, and there have been folks who've incurred costs. So I do think it makes sense, my own view, I think it makes sense to reimburse at least some of those costs. As for Film Forward, since they haven't submitted anything, but they do owe $441, would we use that money to pay the police? We could do that.
We'd have to do that.
And then they wouldn't have that bill at least.
Correct.
So I'll make a motion to approve the following requests for funding. One, the Barrington Business and Community Association, $1,794 to help cover the cost of Wood Avenue Street Fair in July and the BDCA sponsored farmers markets. And two, Film Forward, $441 to cover the costs related to the festival held at Town Hall in late July.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries.
He has, he's got the title. I'm just regular county. Vice President supersedes me.
So the next item on the agenda is a presentation regarding our new town website. One of the things that we've heard from time to time is people talking about transparency. I really feel that we have always been transparent. I think the issue is more of accessibility. Our previous town website was difficult to navigate, so it's hard to find some of the items that were there. It may have been hard to find them, but they were there. This new website, I found to be a lot more user-friendly, and I think it really makes it very accessible for folks. A lot of different ways to get to the same place. So if you're not, if it's not intuitive of you to go one way, I found that there are multiple ways to get to the same place. So is Teresa going to take us through that?
She will.
Teresa.
Hey, great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. President Carroll, I am here representing the team within Town Hall who really led the effort to put together this website. We did work with a consultant, a vendor called Civic Plus, who completes a lot of municipal scale websites, and there are several examples across the state of Rhode Island. But I really want to emphasize that the website redesign effort was a substantial effort. It required a lot of collaboration among different departments and also stakeholders in town to really process, improve, and make sure that we launch a website that is transparent, user-friendly, and we're continuing to make improvements. Even we made a substantial one today that I'll talk about in a minute. So I just want to spend a few minutes going through the site, and I'll share my screen in a minute, but I really want to call attention to the staff in the Planning, Building, and Resilience Department who led this charge, and it's Deborah Page Trim, who is the Communications, Engagement, and Economic Development Officer, and Isabel Gillibrand, our Office Administration Website and Record Specialist. The two of them were a dream team of leadership within Town Hall to really pull this together, work with the vendor, make sure we had really great collaboration among different entities in Town Hall and outside of Town Hall. And we were also supported by Jean Belm in the Office of the Town Manager Hervey, and then department liaisons, Gail DePiro, Public Works, Michelle Cross from the Town Clerk's Office, Ross Latham from the Finance Department, Marianne Oliveira from Human Resources, Tiffany Hayek and Michelle Jeremiah from Recreation and Senior Services, and then our liaisons from the Fire Department, led by Chief Bissett, and the Police Department, led by Chief Correa. So we really had great collaboration across Town Hall. So I will go ahead and just share my screen. I'm not going to go through every page in detail, but just a quick overview of, let me try to find my cursor here, of the highlights of the website. Share my screen, screen 2. Okay. Can you see the website?
Yes.
Wonderful. So we are making an effort to change the photo whenever there's a change in the season. So this is our updated gazebo and back of and senior center, PEC center photo of the season. You can see on the site, every time you click on the Barrington, Rhode Island, brings you back to the home site, the home page. We have different drop-down menus for government, and this includes all the boards and commissions, our agendas and minutes, ordinances, and then hours, contacting the town council, etc. We have also a special, we've added a special item here for the financial town meeting, so we can really direct traffic to these specific needs and events that happen regularly in town. We have the department page. It's really organized by building. So we have all the departments within Town Hall, the Public Library, the PEC Center, the Department of Public Works, Public Safety Building, and the School Department. Going over to community, we have a list of community organizations that work frequently together across town. We have opportunities, including Day of Caring, which is coming up. If anybody hasn't volunteered, put a volunteer application in, you can still do that. But here are some special events and opportunities that we have across town. And then also general, how you can stay informed with town calendars, social media, etc. And I'll talk about the calendars in just a minute. We also have a hot link to some services that are, common requests that we get in town. We have a special page for alerts, construction updates, maps, online services, recycling and trash, tax assessor, etc. And request for records is something that we've actually seen some good traffic on recently. And then the last one is the catch-all of how do I? So we're continuing to populate this page with different questions that we hear from within Town Hall and beyond. And this is where you can get applying for different programs, how you contact different departments and offices within town government, how you can find different items of information items, and then submit, again, requests for records. We've also tried to duplicate some requests and some needs in different menus. So just a quick navigation on this homepage. We tried to keep it fairly simple. In addition to the menus up top, we do have these bubbles or these balls that we can click on to report a concern. We've only had 7 so far, which is great. But we also are working to process, improve, and triage different concerns that come in and assign them to different departments. We have Notify Me, where you can sign up for our e-blast system. We haven't yet launched that. We're still using the old system, but you will see some action on that in the coming months. We have an area for bids and RFPs. Whenever proposals are released or any bid offerings, you can click there. Employment opportunities, documents and forms, and online services. So again, there's some repetition, but it's really meant to be user-friendly. As you scroll down, news and announcements. This is where we made a pretty significant change today. There were always 6 stories on the news and announcements page, but you can also click on the View All News to get the running list of all the news items that have been posted here. We did hear that there were several calls that came into Town Hall today asking, where can I find the agenda for tonight's Town Council meeting? Well, now we are now going to standardize every month, putting in a news item at the top left corner, Town Council meeting October 3rd, and you can click on this to get the Town Council agenda with 2 clicks, 1, 2, and you can open up this PDF of the agenda and then also the town manager's memorandum to walk you through the details behind all of the different agenda items. Going back to the homepage, we have our news and announcements. And then over here on the meeting calendar, we have a calendar for meetings and then a calendar for events. So as you can see, the different events meetings and events that are happening each month are highlighted in blue. And you can click on any of these to get the details of meetings that are happening in town, including a link to the Secretary of State website where you can find the agendas and the minutes for different boards and commissions. We try to populate this with as much detail as we have available. And just scrolling down to the bottom, we have the basic contact info, quick links, and helpful links. So again, we've tried to keep it as simple as possible, but the ability to sort of find different pieces of information in multiple places throughout the site. We also have a search bar at the top, quick links to Facebook, Twitter, and that really kind of covers it. So we are continuing to improve this every week that we hear input and feedback from, again, town staff and residents. So it is a living document, if you will, and we will continue to process and improve to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the public and our elected officials, volunteer boards and commissions, and staff and residents. So I thank you for your time in letting us present this, and want to thank again the team in Town Hall for doing a great job in getting this across the finish line.
Thank you very much. I think this is really helpful. I don't think as many people know about the just vast amounts of information that are available. For example, anyone who's just looking at our agenda can see in blue that there are hyperlinks that will take you to reports from each of our department heads, letters that have been submitted to the town council. You can see those. license requests, and so on and so on. And making it more accessible in this way, I think, can help people to sort of navigate through and find what they want. Any questions for our town planner? Thank you very much for doing this. It was really important to do this, and I'm glad that, after a while you start to learn how to use the old one, but it was a lot easier to learn how to use the new one. Okay, next item, we would ask you to stay right there, Teresa. The next item on our agenda is to discuss and act on the Complete Streets Plan. And our town planner, Teresa Crean, will take us through that one as well.
Great, thanks, President Carroll. So at the end of 2021, well, actually throughout 2021, our former town planner, now town manager, Phil Hervey, drafted the first pass of a Complete Streets Plan. And we were able to make some modifications to that, review it with the planning board to get some comments. We released it to the public in August and also did an online survey to get input on the plan and also crowdsource information from the public on what sidewalks and bikeways were most important to them and where they wanted to see improvements. So I'm going to go through a quick presentation that just summarizes the Complete Streets Plan, and I'm open to any questions that you have. Okay, so we'll share the screen again. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, let's make it big. Okay, there we go. You can see the big screen?
Yes.
Great. All right, thanks. Sorry. The first is just to kick off, what is a complete street? This is following in our Rhode Island Department of Transportation's footsteps, who have led the charge in this statewide. And they've defined complete streets are road systems that accommodate all users to include pedestrians, bicyclists, automobiles, and transit, designed to balance the safety and access needs of all road users. And the idea is to create what's called a multimodal street network and promote more livable communities. And this integrates planning, design, scoping, and then implementation. So how do we get all the aspects together to build these improved systems in town? And the objectives that were laid out in this Complete Streets Plan, which I should just pause for a minute and say all of this information is contained on a dedicated web page under the Planning, Building, and Resilience Department called Complete Streets. We have uploaded the presentation. I did a Zoom online information session in August, and the information is all contained there, including the report that you can download and look at all of this information that I'm going to share with you in this presentation. So our objectives that were defined in this plan are to remove or reduce barriers that limit access to destinations across town. We want to connect different destinations across town, create safe routes to schools, and promote linkages to our trail networks, assets like Town Beach, and access points to our coastline across the town. This reflects goals, objectives, and policies and actions that were developed in our 2015 comprehensive plan. And so through this, we have circulation goals that called for providing a balanced multimodal transportation system, increasing the share of local trips made via walking and biking as opposed to vehicles. We wanted to enhance and promote connections to the East Bay Bike Path and reduce barriers to walking and biking to school. And it did call out specifically that the action to get all of this across the finish line was to create a complete streets policy. So that's what this document is doing. It's reflecting what was laid out in the 2015 comprehensive plan. It's not a really beefy document. It's about 30 pages. So it's a pretty easy read, and but it's very thorough, and it's got a lot of detailed information that includes the information I just shared with you, a summary of existing conditions of our roadways across town. It also calls out some critical issues that we need to think about as we move forward with implementation, and what facility types we have. It also calls out 12 different actions that we can use to move forward. And then it has detailed information, including maps and other types of illustrative examples of how we can achieve a complete street network throughout Barrington. The maps that are included cover our existing infrastructure. So this is showing our existing sidewalks and bike facilities. Those big green bubbles are the quarter-mile and half-mile radius around our schools in town. And we have also the East Bay bike path that's indicated in the middle of the town here, and that black line with the little bikes on it. And also on-street facilities, currently bike lanes, something that's called a sharrow, those stencils that you see on the roadway that indicates a share the road, arrow, sharrow is that term, where that term comes from. So this is our existing network of sidewalks and bikeways. We also have a summary of the speed limits across town, and then we have the school zones highlighted in blue, these blue dashed lines. We also have our accident data, and I'm going through this fairly quickly just for the sake of time and knowing that folks are here maybe for other items on the agenda. But again, this is also covered in the online info session recording that is available on the website. This shows our accident data with pedestrian incidents, bicyclist incidents between 2011 and 2021 across town. And then these little dashed black circles indicate where there are clusters or more than one incident that have happened over the past decade. So this is really informative to think about how we pull all this data together to form our next steps in implementation. Then in terms of recommendations, the plan jumps to make some recommendations to reduce speed limits across town. So we have areas indicated in blue where we should reduce the speed limit from 45 down to 35, from 35 down to 25 in areas across town. The next map illustrates priority sidewalk projects. And this was the first pass that was done as we represented what was in the comprehensive plan, which is born from community input. So this took all of that data before 2021 and pulled it in to say, where should we either build new, which are the black dashed lines here, or rebuild existing sidewalks, which are the red dashed lines in town. All right, and the last map are priority bike facility projects. And these orange dashed lines show the potential for a loop system of different bikeways across the streets around town. So the the orange represent the on-street potential for bike lanes, sharrows, those shared arrows, or signage to help different road users share the road. And then the blue dashed lines are potential multi-use paths. The black dashed lines are those other multi-use paths. So you can see the black dashed line for multi-use path over at Kent Street and the Greenway here, also South Lake Drive here by Echo Lake and in Haynes Park, for example. So this was all captured to develop a draft action plan where we have, I think, 12 different actions across these 2 pages. I won't go into them in detail, but this gives us a good framework to start fundraising and figure out how we can use existing resources in town and also leverage other funding sources with our Rhode Island DOT or possibly other partners. And I'll talk about the RIPTA application in just a minute. But this organizes the action here in the first column. Right now, the recommended time frame, of course, this could be advanced if we come into some money that we could use to build some of these, carry through some of these actions, the type of project, the possible source of funding, and then the cost. So this is, again, there are 12 actions that we have identified in this plan. After this plan was put together, we then took it to the planning board, asked the planning board to review it in February and March of 2022. They approved it for moving forward with the next steps in June of 2022. They were here tonight to present this to town council for your endorsement to move forward. But we also realized that in building upon what was done in 2015 for the comprehensive plan, all the great work that former town planner Hervey did in developing this plan, we wanted to do another pass and another ask of town residents to get their input on what we need for this program for both sidewalks and bikeways. So we launched an online comment form. We held the online information session on Zoom in August. We launched this online comment form, and I want to thank everyone from the town of Barrington, all residents, different members of households who put their time into answering these 6 questions. We received over 680 responses to this form that was on the street for 3 weeks. And we also, what's interesting in terms of the data is we received responses from addresses across over 250 different streets in town. And so where the surveys came from in town, most of them came from Soames, then Lincoln. So these are all of the streets that we received over 5 submittals from the same street. So you can see Soames, we got about 26 or so submittals from Soames, and then it goes down from there. So again, 250 streets represented in this survey, which is terrific. We're still processing the data, so here are just a couple quick snapshots. In terms of which sidewalks and roadways do people use regularly, this is that quick word cloud to show which ones were mentioned most often. Most of these roads that you see on this page that are highlighted are state roads. So we have to be very aware of what we as the town can control in terms of sidewalks and bikeways on state roads, which is a whole different coordination and application process with our state Rhode Island DOT, and what we can control as the town on non-state roads. So for example, Lincoln Avenue, Maple Avenue are town roads. So we can control, we can start to plan for projects on non-state roads, but Middle Highway, County Road, Washington, Soames, New Meadow, Massasoit are state roads. So we will have to coordinate with Rhode Island DOT to do anything on sidewalks or bikeways on those roads in the future. And some of them are already in the pipeline for funding in the what's called the Transportation Improvement Program, which we get to give DOT our wish list every few years to let them know we really want to have those state roads improved for different uses and just improvements on those road corridors. So anyway, this represents what sidewalks and bikeways respondents use regularly. Then we ask them, select any of the following that you feel would make your neighborhood safer. Overwhelmingly, new sidewalks, that blue bar came in with the most votes, followed by sidewalk repairs, and the rest of these really did all come in at the same level, but overwhelmingly, Barrington residents want new sidewalks. And then we asked, choose 3 of the following projects that would directly benefit you. Again, projects to promote walking came in higher than anything else, followed by a townwide bicycle network plan. So that green bar is the townwide bicycle network plan. And then with the purple bar is assess and improve street lighting. The brown bar is assess and improve signage. And also directional signage is that pink bar. So this really gave us good input to validate some of the recommendations and figure out where we can focus and prioritize the action plan. We then also asked the last 2 questions, just add your own project. So we haven't yet gone through the 682, or sorry, in this case, 400 responses we received that gave us great ideas for projects, but we are working on it. We really want to organize this so we can do a criteria, site selection, prioritization, exercise to figure out how we as the town can implement projects on town roads and where we need to form our applications to the state for consideration for state money or federal money. So all of this information was completed before we submitted our letter of support and signing on to this program that the federal government released called Safe Streets and Roads for All. Federal government loves acronyms, so the acronym is SS4A. And RIPTA and the governor's office basically did a call for interest of Rhode Island cities and towns to sign on to this $5 million ask for funding from this program to get us across the finish line for action planning. And the idea is that we signed on, Barrington signed on to this, that RIPTA led the application into the federal government. Barrington signed on with 28 other Rhode Island cities and towns. And if we get that money, we'll get consultant assistance to help us with that prioritization effort, site selection criteria, and get us over that site selection phase of this next step in this process. The idea there is then to tee up $50 million ask to the federal government for implementation of these projects across these 29 towns that have signed on. So this really did help us get that information into the state, the governor's office, and the Rhode Island Public Transit Authority to sign on to this effort to get some more resources and funding, hopefully by December of this year, if we're awarded the grant, if the state of Rhode Island is awarded the grant. In the meantime, we do have funding for sidewalk and bikeways initiatives from the financial town meeting approval of, I think it's over $4 million to maybe focus on local roads and sidewalks and bikeways on local roads. We can start now with our site selection criteria for our local roads. And with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions that you have.
Questions for our planner? Yeah, please go ahead.
Extremely comprehensive. This solves a lot of needs. This has been talked about in our old comp plan, even just the concept of it at least. And I think it's been recognized for a long time that we need, especially the one element I really like is just the idea of finding alternative ways for kids to get to schools. We have such a backup with several schools in terms of the commute that kids take and some parents being concerned about the route that they take. Specifically, I'm hearing from parents out of the Zion, in that Zion neighborhood who are concerned about the commute to Barrington Middle School and Primrose. And I just call that to your attention to address. But overall, it's extremely comprehensive, and I think it's really well needed, and I just applaud the whole effort. The one question that I have is earlier in the process, we talked about, and I brought up the idea that sharrows are somewhat controversial. Have you looked further into that? And the reason is, and just for people who weren't at that meeting, it's the idea of sort of scrunching bikes and cars together on the same roadway with some ambiguity as to, from the driver's perspective, what is going on. Is this a bike lane? Why is the cyclists where they are? And there's some evidence that they can lead to more collisions between cars and bicycles. And so that it's not, I don't think it's necessarily a cut and dried issue, but just as a matter of safety, that's the only thing in the whole plan that raised a semi-red flag, but I'm not the expert, you are.
Yeah, so a couple of strategies with that. I've talked to a resident in Barrington who works for Mass DOT specifically on complete streets. That is their job. And, bounce some of these ideas around, and I think there's a lot more data we could bring in to learn from. And there are these pilot projects that have happened around Providence to close some streets off or to test some, 1 or 2 months at a time, some share the road initiatives that we can learn from and get more data from. And then Bike Newport has done an amazing job with education across Newport to try to promote bicycling and sharing the road. So I think we have a lot of access to partners in other places where we can really draw in some of the lessons learned from other places that have tried to really promote bicycling, safe bicycling from all ages across those towns and cities. To inform how we move forward. So I appreciate that comment, but I think we need to pull the data together on the sharrows.
Yeah, that's just, I'd encourage you to dig a little deeper just on that part. Again, you're the expert. I don't pretend to be. And it's mainly, as I understand it from what I've read, it's not the cyclists understand it. They're fully educated. They understand it, but it's the drivers who sometimes hesitate because they don't know what this is, especially if they're not maybe from the town they're driving through. Yeah. That can be a concern because you don't have the opportunity to necessarily educate the transient person who's just driving on their way through Barrington.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Any questions on that?
No hands are raised.
Okay. Thank you, Teresa. That was great.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Next item on our agenda is to discuss the former Zion Bible campus property. Again, we do need to do that. I'm sorry. Forgive me, back to our last agenda item. This wasn't just a presentation. We're also being asked to approve this. So does anyone want to make that motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the Town of Barrington Complete Streets Plan as presented.
Seconded.
Made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries.
President Carroll, I just want to add that we're researching the possibility of forming a bike ped advisory committee or amending the scope of the open space committee to address bike and ped issues throughout town. So that's a future action item.
Great. Okay. Next item is a discussion on former Zion Bible campus property. Those of you who are looking at the agenda will see it's not a discuss and act. We don't have the authority to oppose or prevent a demolition permit. We do have influence, and so we are trying to influence that decision by negotiating with them, with the owners of the Zion Bible property, and they are willing to do so. So with that, does anyone want to be heard on this topic? Please come forward. Good evening.
My name is Fred Achardo, and I live here in town. And I know that the council and the planning board have been working with the Shine Harmony group for a number of years now. And I just had a few questions as to the situation that we find ourselves in, where something as historic as that building could be taken down without lengthy discussion before the permit was issued. The first question is, has the town been in touch with the Historic Society in Providence, which has a statewide governance over historical places? The solicitor began the discussion this evening talking about designated historic places being on the National Register. Well, the state of Rhode Island has some fairly extensive historical preservation groups and organizations. And I just wonder if we've been in discussion with them to see what can be done to prevent the demolition of that building.
So please, Mike.
Sure. I'm very well aware of those regulations, all those procedures, the Rhode Island general laws related to all of that. They all arise out of situations where a historic district is in place. So that is the baseline or the foundation upon which is built all of those guidelines. When there is not a historic district in place, those guidelines do not have any legal force and effect. Now, having said that, of course, there are many people sitting in this room, as well as those who are residents here in the town, that are extremely concerned about the status of Barrington Court and do not want to see it torn down. And there are other ways to approach this other than the legal approach. And we will certainly use everything that we can to negotiate something with the owners to try and get that building preserved. And if that means trying to find grants, if that means trying to negotiate the saving that building in return for other things that the owners may want to do on the property, we'll use all of that. We know what the goal is, but the ability to stop the demolition permit based on some legal theory that it's a historic building and therefore it has to be preserved and cannot be torn down, that is not a path which will be successful. Again, there are other paths that we hope will be successful. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the attorney for the owners has made it very clear that they will do nothing with regard to that building until we have the time to sit down. And once we do that, and I have the ability to report back to the council, we'll know what the next steps are. But we'll use everything at our disposal. We won't leave any stone unturned. We've received many, many emails on this subject with all kinds of suggestions, everything from looking at possible deed restrictions, of which unfortunately I'm not aware of any, but all of these ideas that have been submitted are all good ideas. I think the public should continue to communicate if ideas come up, and we'll use everything at our disposal. But again, the good news is nothing is going to happen in the near future, and we are going to have the ability to do everything in our power to save that building.
I appreciate that. And to that point, in the 10 years that the current owners have had the property, they've indicated that they want to develop the rest of the land there, which is fine. And they've been planning on that, and they've been presenting several conceptual items, but they weren't really fully elaborated. Has any discussion been given to the idea of a conservation trust for that property? In other words, in the sense that perhaps the owners would be willing to donate it to an organization that would then take on the horrendous expense of fixing it up again. Because I know that Barrington College did their best effort at the end of the 80s, because I was lucky enough to work with them. And what is there now is that effort of theirs to preserve it and make it open to the public even. One of the things I find very unfortunate is since Barrington College left the town and sold it to Zion, the town itself is not really aware of that historic building, or has never had any access to it to appreciate that it is a unique gem rivaling anything you'll find in Newport.
Sure. A couple of responses. Number one, the master plan that was approved for development of that property included the preservation of that building.
Absolutely.
So if in fact they now want to seek something different, they would require the approval of a new master plan. So again, this goes back to negotiations, and the town and they are very aware of that desire to somehow preserve that. And whether that's, as you suggest, that it be donated and that some other organization takes on the responsibility for fixing it, that's certainly a possibility among many others.
And I would add that they did get pretty far down the road. We negotiated in 2016 the tax stabilization agreement, which also required the preservation of Belton Court. That agreement would have essentially slowed down the increase in taxes as the property value increased. We got conceptual drawings about how they were going to turn that into a continuing care retirement community with some condominiums on one end of the building and Belton Court making up, I think, an assisted living portion of the building. But that eventually went nowhere. The tax stabilization agreement expired, but they did get fairly far down the road on that. Unfortunately, they didn't get far enough to get any financing, so that didn't go anywhere.
So what does the council see in the near future then, making the preservation of that building a reality? From what I'm hearing from the solicitor, it sounds like the demolition permit is saying, okay, we're going to put this on the table, so let's get serious and decide what we're going to do here. One of the things that you prefaced this conversation was that you're not in a position to prevent the permit if they satisfy all the requirements. So how do we see this get turned around to a much better conclusion?
I think I am, as I said earlier, if they meet the requirements of the demolition permit, the town has no legal ability to go to court to stop it. That I'm certain of. However, again, they have notified me through direct conversations with their attorney that they're very interested in sitting down to talk about it. And that's the best I have for this evening. But I think that's good news because they, of course, recognize what a important structure this is to the town, and they're willing to sit down to discuss it with us. That meeting will happen within the next 2 weeks.
Okay, and thank you. And on one last statement, my profession was in IT, and I sat in on many design meetings for doing rather large projects. And I remember a consultant once telling me, with enough time and money, you can do anything. So if we're able to build this structure that we're all standing in, which was a huge undertaking by the town of Barrington, I'm pretty confident we could take on something as immensely important as Belton Court as a public facility, without a doubt. I mean, it's just a question of getting enough people and resources in place. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there anyone online?
I see one person, Marcia Davis.
Marcia Davis, please.
Yeah, a second. Yeah, a second. Okay. There we go.
Good evening, and thank you very much. I am the sister to Fred Achardo, who is named after Frederick S. Peck. And I would just add, there are people at the preservationrhodeisland.gov that would like to work with you and help you. I think looking at the deeds and doing a really good, thorough job of looking at those deeds to make sure there isn't any conservation language in them. And, I really appreciate all you're doing. This, is a very disheartening thing for us. We, our mother grew up in that house, and it was donated, as was the Peck Center donated to Barrington. And the Pecks have been in Barrington since the late 1600s. Incredibly philanthropic family, and that went beyond Barrington's borders. That particular structure is, the granite and the steel is solid, even in spite of the roof being open for how many years, where they never did anything. This is purposeful neglect, and there should be some consequences for this current owner's lack of care for a piece of property. And, we have the technology, cameras could have been in place to stop the vandals. There's so many things that should have been done. And, there's a lot of people, a lot of concern. We have to do everything we can to stop this from continuing. And I really appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I just want to assure the council and everyone, we will certainly reach out to the Preservation Society, anyone who's out there that can help. We won't leave any stones unturned to try to do what's right for this building.
Thank you. Phil, is there anyone else?
No one else has their hand raised.
Okay. Anyone on the council? Oh, please, sir. Come forward.
Good evening. Michael Panaswick, Mallard Cove Way. And I have a general question. What use is it, if we can't stop this tear down, what use is it for all the people that went through the work of making it, putting it on a historic register? I'm sure it took a lot of public input, a lot of work. And, what does it mean if not you're going to save it?
I think that's a good question, and I share your frustration. I was one of the people who tried to negotiate the preservation of this through a tax stabilization agreement. There are lots of people who served on the planning board who set up a master plan that required the preservation of Belton Court. Mm-hmm. And then there are all the people who got it on the National Register because of its significance. And it's frustrating, but none of those things as a legal matter prevent folks from tearing that down. That doesn't mean that we can't try to negotiate with them, and they seem to be open to it. They certainly, they are limited in what they can do with the property. If they want to put a continuing care retirement community on there, they can do that probably as of right, because that's what it's zoned for. If they want to do anything else, we'd have to change the zoning. So they are looking to work with us. So that gives us some ability to do it, but I share your frustration.
Well, they're looking for tax breaks or some kind of financial consideration, I would imagine.
We already gave them tax breaks, but they bypassed those. We negotiated with them initially. That's what a tax stabilization agreement is. Property is worth a certain amount undeveloped. And then once they start to develop it, it becomes worth a lot more. We want the tax revenue from it, but we wanted it developed enough that we said, if the taxes should be $1 million based on what you've got on there, for this number of years, we'll charge you 200,000. For this number of years, it'll be $500,000 and so on. So we negotiated that. And if they had gone forward with that, Belton Court would have been preserved. We'd have that retirement community. And then at a certain point, we'd be taxing them at the full value of that developed property. But as I said, they didn't get the financing for it, so that project didn't go forward.
Yeah, it just seems like such a common strategy of buying property and saying it's going to be for elderly housing, and then they buy it, people buy it, and it never turns out that way for elderly housing.
Yes.
And it is very frustrating, though. I'm surprised there aren't any deed restrictions in the transfer of that property. Seeing with I understand tonight, it was gifted to the town of Barrington.
We will be taking a closer look at that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone else?
One person online.
Please.
Raise their hand. That's Sharon.
Sharon, if you could identify yourself and your residency, please.
Hi, I live at 11 Western up the street from Belcourt. I had just been looking into it for a little bit because, you know, it's a cool property. Obviously, my kids are into it because it looks like a castle. Everybody knows it, and it's important to the town because it is, you know, it's like living on Bellevue Ave, but right up the street from us. So, you know, when I looked at that, I saw that it doesn't have like a deed restriction on it. However, it looks like a lot of the different premises within it are platted differently. So I don't know if, you know, you could, and I mean, I know obviously there's a lot that goes into being like, well, you know, we're going to take this particular plat back through whatever purpose, you know, needed or whatever. But, you know, and obviously I know plans change a significant amount, but I did see that you guys did not grant the reduction in taxes in 2021, which is fairly recent, but it doesn't look like, you know, generally anything has happened with that property since the initial, you know, when they put it up and they got it, I think in 2011. Yep. So, and I mean, obviously, like when I know a lot of buildings throughout Rhode Island, you know, there's a lot of mill conversions that occur, and that takes an extensive amount of time. You have to have the proper utility and, you know, civil engineers and everything else like that. And I have not seen anything taking place really ever at that property other than the one car patrol that stands there. And obviously I know kids are being kids and they're breaking into it because it's a cool building, and which makes it unsafe, obviously, because it's a huge building and you don't want to have any issues with it. But that is on the owner and not on, you know, the town necessarily. I mean, I know it's kind of like hand in hand, but it does seem like they have essentially vacated the property aside from having the one car that sits there to maintain, you know, some sense of security for it. So, and then also just the idea with things changing to this significant amount, because the initial, you know, cottage development of the individual 35 cottage dwelling units, aside from Belcourt being maintained as a senior living establishment, which is obviously you'd have to have the zone restriction changed. But it just seems like to now being offered up as a 400 unit place, you know, that would significantly, that, and then also, you know, the 25 watts, and those two combined, you know, would drastically change the town as a single family unit, which would then impact the schools significantly, which I think is a general concern for everybody, because obviously, you know, that's fine, but it's just like thinking ahead the 10 steps that are needed to make sure that like all of those things can be handled by the town. You know what I mean? And I think also just given the weight of everything that's, you know, in Rhode Island as a whole, where, you know, we have a lot of companies that come to the town and therefore to the taxpayers to say, well, I won't do this thing you don't want me to do, but you have to give, you know, you did the tax stabilization agreement, which is a different situation. But I mean, this you know, Shine Harmony purchased this for $3.5 million for a 38 acre massive place. You know what I mean? That is a very cheap area. I mean, that's very cheap. So in comparison to like, you know, property values established now, and obviously I know there's demolition needed and there's going to be a lot of work. There's underground tanks. So there's, you know, a lot of intensive permitting for that and stuff. But, you know, I don't think that, in my opinion, and obviously, you know, it doesn't really matter that much, but, you know, to have, I just don't want you or the town, including all the taxpayers of the town, to then have to be on the hook for giving, you know, money to a privately owned company that, you know what I mean, should be able to figure out their finances on their own if they are in fact a decent developer, which is questionable at best. That's all.
Thank you, Sharon. I should just clarify at least one thing, and I'll, Phil, go ahead.
Just ask that Sharon say her last name.
Oh, Sharon, could you tell us what your last name is, please?
Santos.
Santos. Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, we did negotiate a tax stabilization agreement. That never went into effect. So we never gave them a break on their taxes because that agreement was in return. It was an incentive for them to develop the property for senior housing. But since that never went that way, the agreement was never effectuated. They may have sought some relief off of what their tax bill was in 2021. I don't recall that. That would have gone before our Board of Assessment review, and they would have determined, the board would have determined whether the property was properly valued. They're not getting any breaks on their taxes. They're paying what the market value is for that property. It would certainly be worth a lot more if developed. So it's in our interest to see it developed in certain ways. As we talked about for years, we wanted it to be a continuing care retirement community, but I'm not certain. It sounds like they're not interested in that. So there'll be a lot of discussions on how it will be developed. Any further comments? Please. Mr. Remishitis.
Tom Remishitis, 1 Howard Street. I find it very odd standing here again. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we had a chance to buy this property and do whatever we wanted with it. Now, all of a sudden, we're hearing demolition, and now everybody wants to do something about it. Where was everybody 20 years ago when we could have done something with this property? To sit here and wash out, you're talking about demolition, and we're talking about demolition on the monastery, but that didn't go through because the townspeople said no. So this is going to be like the same thing. But what strikes me odd is that we're going to negotiate with them. But you just stated that kind of blew my mind a little bit, that if we don't get our way, we're going to restrict them on restrictions for further prospect or further ability for them to do something to the property. Unless I misunderstood what you had said.
Yeah,
you said that you were gonna.
No, let me be clear. They want to cooperate with us,
right,
because they could submit a comprehensive permit for the property and develop it in that way. That's one way of doing things. And by doing that, you have to agree to have a certain amount of affordable housing on there. We've already said we want affordable housing on there, and that's something we negotiate. Any development is going to have affordable housing. So, how that is developed, we did it before. It would be up to another town council whether they want to enter into another tax stabilization agreement. In my opinion, doing so might be in our best interest. I'd rather get $1.5 million in taxes from that property than $200,000. If it's developed, we can get a lot of money money for that, and we need it.
I agree, but we shouldn't have to.
But
You know, what I listened to, what you said, I put through my head, it almost sounded like, oh, well,
the
if they don't
TSA
negotiate with us and something to the good, we're going to hold them ransom on putting more.
No, I would love for us to cooperate with them. It'll be another council to do that because it won't come before us. But I would love to negotiate with them on a project that makes sense both for them and for the town. And I'm sure that the next council would be open to doing that because there's a lot of upside for us in doing that.
Definitely. But we don't own the property, so
And
we
that's
shouldn't
another-
have a big say in what they're going to do to it, even
and
though
that's
there's a
another thing.
lot of stuff going on for historic value, which
I don't
we
know
can't do
about-
anything about right now.
I don't know about my colleagues, but that was kind of one of the lessons learned when the monastery property came up. You know, we did have an opportunity, what was it, 15 years ago, to purchase that property. I've heard there was concerns about, you know, underground tanks and the cost and so on. But one of the great things about owning property is you get to decide what goes on it and what gets torn down.
Not us. We don't own the property.
We don't own that one.
Right.
You're right. Thank you. Councilor Breyer.
I think one of the sources of confusion might have been in the restrictions that he's hearing that we would put on if they don't negotiate. And it's not new restrictions. Part of their original negotiation rezoned the property to senior residential village. So now that's all they can do. Regardless, if they take down the building, all they can do is what it's currently zoned for. And those are the restrictions that they would be choosing. If they come back to the table and negotiate something else, it would probably change the zoning and that would be part of the negotiation. But there's no penalty because we have no authority to tell them they can't demolish.
Didn't sound like that when it came out.
Yeah.
Well,
No,
I
that-
apologize.
Thank you for the clarification.
Vice President Hunt, did you?
No, thank you. Just want to chime in just to say, stay tuned. There's going to be a meeting, I think, clearly in the next couple of weeks. It sounds encouraging. We have no idea what they're going to say. But I think that'll be telling in terms of what might happen moving forward. So I encourage everyone to stay tuned, continue to stay on top of this topic. Hopefully there is another public type of a meeting after Mr. Ursillo and Mr. Hervey have their meeting with the developer. But again, a lot of this is kind of speculative right now in terms of what might happen. I'm as curious as anybody to see what they're going to say.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is to discuss and act on bids. So we can take them through this. First one is the Department of Public Works, and I will be recusing from this item.
All right. So as Mr. Carroll mentioned, the first item is the Department of Public Works and also the Planning, Building, and Resilience. This is for on-call engineering and design services. And I see Teresa's name on the board from planning, and I see Mr. Corby up there. Phil, any information you have or any?
I'll split the
preference
difference and let them jump in if they have to.
Excellent.
How's that?
Great.
Teresa, are you okay with that?
Sure.
The town has issued a request for qualifications for on-call professional engineering and design consultant services. And that happened in July with the middle of August due date for these proposals. We received 11 proposals from firms. This would be for the intent is to have the town council approve a list of on-call consultants for specific design and engineering disciplines for a 5-year period. The town has reviewed and is continuing to review these proposals, and we are recommending a partial award for tonight with the additional engineering and design firms added for consideration in November. This list will grow. The disciplines listed will include additional engineers when we finish a review for November. So you might see additional firms listed for these disciplines and additional disciplines that aren't listed. Key one is the selection of a complete streets engineering firm, which will help us design these improvements that were mentioned by Teresa, utilizing the $4 million plus that was released to the town from the unspent middle school bond balance at the last FTM. The motion is provided in the materials for that are before you. And like I said, we'll have additional firms to include for awarding the on-call list in November. So this is just step one. So we can get a few of them on board now because we have ongoing projects. We have no on-call consultants available now because the last 5-year period has expired. So we're looking for this initial approval tonight and then additional for awarding in November. I don't know if Alan or Teresa might have anything else to add to that.
I'm all set, Phil.
Okay, thank you.
I'm all set.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hervey. Any questions or comments from the council? Questions or comments from the public? All right. Is there a motion to approve the following firms to serve as Town of Barrington on-call consultants for a period of 5 years? And I'll list them here, Mary. For the Planning Board Peer Review and Inspection Services, PAR Corporation as the primary and VHB as the secondary. For wastewater projects, Wright Pierce. For the landfill closure, monitoring and design services, PAR Corporation. For landscape design, landscape architectural services, Kevin Alverson. For coastal engineering projects, including shoreline stabilization, dock construction, and seawall repair, GZA for structural coastal projects, and First Water Engineering for non-structural coastal. And finally, for survey services, including property line and topography, PAR Corporation and VHB. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Motion made by Councilor Castel, seconded by Councilor Breyer. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. That passes unanimously 4-0 with 1 recusal.
Okay, the next bid up for discussion and approval is from the police department. This is a Ford Explorer hybrid. Chief Correa, could you take us through that, please?
Good evening. Yes, the police department is looking to purchase. Well, we were originally looking to purchase the 2022-2023 Ford Interceptor Explorer through the MPA. We missed the window on that. We were going to do that last month. So what we did was we put an advertisement in the Barrington Times on September 30th, seeking invitations to bid. In addition to the advertisement, we emailed 4 different vendors, including Tasca and McGovern Municipal Headquarters located up in Framingham, Massachusetts. The email was asking those vendors to bid on a hybrid Ford Explorer. We only received 1 bid. McGovern Municipal Headquarters up in Worcester, up on Worcester Road, up in Framingham, submitted a bid for a 2022 Ford Police Interceptor utility all-wheel drive hybrid. They submitted the bid at $39,534.35. Interestingly enough, that's about $4,000 less than what the MPA was for a 2023, so a little slight savings. I'm recommending that we purchase this vehicle, that the town purchase this vehicle through the capital fund. Being a hybrid, there's a 30% savings in fuel, and it's also what we'll do is we'll cycle this car into the fleet. This will be a patrol vehicle, and then we cycle another patrol vehicle down into the fleet that we use for detail vehicles. The detail vehicles to date have generated $49,000 in income from the town. That's already been collected. So we're putting the excess or the surplus vehicles to good use. So again, it's my recommendation that we approve $39,534.35 from the capital fund.
Thanks, Chief. You've just made the purchase of the second electric vehicle for the police department, the Ford Lightning, last month.
Correct.
Last month, I think. Would it be fair to say that the reason you're not going for a third is because there's none out there to buy? Is that why?
And also that Ford has not electrified the Ford Explorer line of police vehicles. We're anxiously waiting for that to happen.
I saw that they had pushed that back. It was 23, and I think it's now 24 when they expect that to happen. All electric plug-in Explorer. So I guess we'll have to be patient.
Yes.
Thank you. Any questions for Chief? Do I hear a motion to approve the bid from McGovern Municipal Headquarters, 1200 Worcester Road, Framingham, Mass. in the amount of $39,534.35 for the purchase of one 2022 Ford Interceptor utility all-wheel drive hybrid vehicle?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on our agenda is to discuss and act on ordinances. The first item is for us to introduce ordinances. In order for us to pass an ordinance, we have to introduce it at one meeting, and then we can vote on whether to adopt it at a public hearing at a later meeting. We can't do both at once. So this is the introduction of an ordinance amending our zoning ordinance, cannabis sales. I'm just going to kind of briefly go through it. Basically, we will have on our ballot for our voters a question of whether they want to approve or reject cannabis sales and other related products in the town of Barrington. If they approve it, we will need to have zoning in place. So this proposed ordinance would be in place in case they approve it. If they reject it, we won't need this. Is that fair to say, Mike?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. We presently have an ordinance in place with regard to the compassion incentives and medicinal uses of marijuana. If in fact the voters decide that the recreational use of marijuana and all the products related there too is something that they want to occur here in town based on the election on November 8th, we need to have in place zoning so that we can control where those facilities are located.
Okay.
And that's why we're recommending this ordinance.
Okay. Any questions from the council?
It is a somewhat tangential issue, but I see in the documentation that you're planning on publishing a Q&A. We are 16 days from early voting, and that's going to be out before then. What would be the content? What are you looking to include in that?
We're looking at including description of what the planning board is recommending, which is not being introduced, but would be considered at the public hearing in November. So we'll talk about what the planning board is proposing as far as amendments to the land use, the use table and the zoning ordinance for these cannabis related uses. And also setting the context up of explaining what is before voters in November and how many of these would be available in this region. I'm just going to walk through any kind of questions we anticipate receiving, and we'll be coordinating this with New Harbor Group, our communications consultant, and the League of Cities and Towns, which has a lot of material about this topic. So we'll have I think we'll have all our bases covered on the Q&A.
Yeah, I would just be cautious on it. Keep it straight, straight and factual on that. And whatever you're saying, something like that, you can be accused of trying to sway things one way or the other. And I don't think we're trying to do that. We're just trying to inform.
We'll run it by the solicitor too.
And we won't advocate one way or another. It's really just to answer questions and make clear what it would do.
Okay, do I hear a motion to introduce ordinance 2022-25, amending the zoning ordinance to regulate cannabis uses in Barrington?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Do we have to schedule the public hearing?
No, yes, that's right. What is the November meeting date?
7.
And I will amend this to include and schedule the public hearing for November 7, 2022.
Second that. Or I'll amend my motion to make that.
Okay.
As suggested.
And is there a second for that?
Amended second.
Okay. Made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries.
And Mary, we'll work with your office on the advertising requirements that are necessary since it's an amendment to the zoning ordinance.
Okay. The next series of items on our agenda are for ordinances. This is when we actually hold a public hearing and decide on these ordinances. So the first one up for discussion is ordinance 2022-17, an ordinance to add chapter 80 cannabis. And this is essentially to prevent smoking vaping in public places. This doesn't depend on whether it's the question of whether we allow sales in town is irrelevant because anyone who wants to can buy it somewhere else, and then they would be legally able to smoke it in public without this ordinance. So I think, Councilor Breyer, this is your initiative. Did you want to say anything before we open the public hearing?
Yes, just the purpose and the language used really mirrors what our current tobacco and nicotine prohibition is. So it's not excluding the use of smoked or vaporized cannabis from anywhere that you cannot. I botched the words there, but yeah. Cannabis won't be able to be smoked or vaporized anywhere that tobacco products cannot be smoked or vaporized, which is really public parks and the beach.
And restaurants and bars and,
Okay.
yeah, so it's basically
Well,
wherever
that's
you,
all state law.
right, wherever you can't smoke, you won't be able to smoke marijuana. So,
Or vape?
or vape,
Right.
or vape.
Okay, I'm opening the public hearing into this motion. Would anyone from the public like to be heard? Yes, please. Ms. Berard. Public space.
Hi, Kate Berard, 3 Cheshire Drive. I just was curious if we could think about cannabis smoking in public more akin to alcohol use in public. I know that the city of Cranston, their police chief had proposed ordinances that discussed cannabis use in vehicles and open containers. So if you could consider that sort of parallel, I think it would be worthwhile. Thanks.
Thank you. Mike, would that be a separate ordinance? I don't know. Open container laws are at the state level.
Right. Here's my thoughts. This is all new. It's new to everyone. This we definitely need in place no matter what, so that we don't have people smoking marijuana in places that you can't smoke tobacco. So my recommendation would go to forward with this one the way it is. We can certainly consider, obviously you can smoke tobacco in your vehicle. So, and I'm not even sure that we have the local authority to prevent people from smoking anything while they're driving through the town. So, but yeah, that's why we have public input at these hearings. We'll certainly keep it in mind. But I would definitely go forward with this one tonight so it's in place prior to recreational cannabis being used throughout the state.
And if your office could look into whether we would have any authority.
More than
to do
happy
that,
to do
that
so.
would be great.
More than happy to do so.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public want to be heard on this? Is there anyone online, Phil, who would want to be heard on this?
No hands are raised.
Okay. So there being none, I am closing the public hearing. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I will make a motion to adopt ordinance 2022-17 as presented, prohibiting cannabis smoking and cannabis vaping in public spaces.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? Vice President Hom.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to say that I agree with what Ms. Berard mentioned with respect to, in my mind, I do equate this more to alcohol consumption than tobacco consumption, even though they're both smoked and or vaped. I also agree with the solicitor that perhaps we just get this set up, but then once we have something in place, we can amend this ordinance once we have more information. Is that essentially the way that we can proceed with this?
Absolutely.
Okay, so yeah, I think we do need to get something in place and then perhaps research some of those other areas in terms of what state controlled, town controlled, and how we can fit this into perhaps public alcohol consumption as being its corollary.
Okay. Okay. So the motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And no abstentions. That motion carries. Thank you. The next item is 2022-19, Personnel Policies and Holidays, a new edition of holiday Juneteenth. And this was suggested by our DEI committee. Is that right? Annalise, was this suggested? This was our DEI committee. So unless anyone wants to make any introduction to this, I'll open the public hearing. Would anyone like to be heard on this? Yes, please. Mr. Medlin.
Good evening, Council. My name is Braxton Howard Medlin. I live at 19 Commonwealth Avenue off of Soames. Just for a little bit of history about Juneteenth, January 1st, 1863. Enslaved and free African Americans were waiting word on whether the Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect. All of the people in the Confederate States were declared legally free at midnight, but only through the 13th Amendment did emancipation end slavery throughout the United States. However, not everyone in the Confederate territories would be free. It could not be implemented in places that were still under Confederate control. As a result, enslaved people would not be free until much later. Freedom finally came on June 19th, 1865, when Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas. The Army announced that enslaved Black people in the state were free by executive decree. This day came to be known as Juneteenth by newly freed people in Texas. Growing up, I spent my summers in Buffalo, New York, which is my mother's hometown. Their Juneteenth celebration started in 1976 when my mother graduated from high school. She made sure to take me to the festival every single summer, and I still celebrate Juneteenth even into my adulthood. Aided by the Congressional Black Caucus on June 15th, 2021, the Senate passed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, establishing Juneteenth as a federal holiday. It passed through the House on June 16th, and President Biden signed the bill on June 17th of 2021, making Juneteenth the 11th American federal holiday and the first to obtain legal observance as a federal holiday since Martin Luther King Jr. Day was designated in 1983. Federal government employees will now take the day off every year on June 19th, and I think that it's high time that we have time to celebrate and recognize that holiday in Barrington. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any other member of the public want to be heard on this? Phil, is there anyone online?
Nobody's raising their hand.
Okay. Seeing none, I am closing the public hearing. Does anyone want to make that motion?
I'll make that motion. Or will you?
You move first.
Okay.
Right.
I make a motion to adopt ordinance 2022-19, establishing Juneteenth as a town holiday.
Second.
That motion is made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is 2022-21, Chapter 33, Personnel Policies, Section 33-23, Holidays, Name Changes to Holidays. This is Councilor Breyer's initiative, so I wanted to give him a chance to just introduce it.
Sure. So when the Juneteenth proposal came to the council, it had me reflect. About a couple of years ago, I brought up the idea of potentially changing Columbus Day as it was starting to happen in more communities throughout the country, and spoke with the solicitor's office about whether to attach it to that ordinance or to draft a new one. And so the suggestion was to draft a new one. And in doing so, I wanted to make the ordinance with some blanks to fill in following the public hearing, believing that really we can call a day whatever we want to call a day, but it really takes the embracement of the community to celebrate a holiday. And so I thought, I believe Indigenous Peoples Day is an appropriate name, but I want to hear from the community whether folks agree. And also take the opportunity, once I was looking at the list, I saw that the day after Thanksgiving is listed as day after Thanksgiving, and I think we can come up with a better name than that.
Great. So I'm about to open the public hearing. I'd like to state my own thoughts on this, which is that I think Christopher Columbus is really indefensible as a human being. By his own writings. He enslaved people, and contemporary writers showed that he committed horrible crimes against humanity. But I will also say that Columbus Day really didn't begin as a day to, although it's called that, it wasn't really a day to celebrate Columbus discovering America. He never made it to continental U.S. It was started, the first Columbus Day was in 1892. That was 1 year following the lynching of 11 Italian Americans in New Orleans. And there were problems with the Italian embassy, and the people of Italy were angry with the government, as well as a newly sort of powerful bloc of Italian American immigrants. Because of that, the president of the United States decided that that would be a good day to celebrate Columbus Day. And it was sort of adopted as a way to celebrate this new group that had made it to America. Look at us, we're here. In the same way that a lot of immigrant communities were rejected when they first came, the Italian Americans were. So it's really become, for many, many people, more about Italian Americans than it is about Columbus. Recognizing that the state of Colorado changed the name of Columbus Day, but they didn't change it to Indigenous Peoples Day. And I'll propose that we do that for the day after Thanksgiving, because that's a group that certainly deserves recognition. They changed it to Mother Cabrini Day. Mother Cabrini was an Italian-American immigrant who founded orphanages, schools, and hospitals throughout America. And in her lifetime, Cabrini was responsible for founding 67 institutions, including schools, hospitals, orphanages throughout the United States and in South and Central America. She was an extraordinary individual, really representing the best of Italian-American immigrants and immigrants in general, and helped so many people. And it was for that reason that in 2020, the legislature of Colorado passed and the governor signed into law an act changing the name of Columbus Day in place of Columbus Day as Cabrini Day, Mother Cabrini Day. And I would suggest that as a replacement for Columbus Day. I would also suggest a group that has, we were fortunate yesterday to have the Pokanoket people at an event, and it was extraordinary. And I think that really is a need to recognize our Indigenous peoples. But we don't have to make it a zero-sum game, and we can recognize both. And I think it's appropriate to do so after Thanksgiving Day. And that's just my opinion. And it's certainly open for debate. And I would open the public hearing on this and welcome anyone who would like to speak on this topic. Please come forward.
Hi, Kristen Panasek, 16 Malaco Way. Not wanting to be controversial at all, but I did arrive here in this town with my family in 1963. Most of my family has left for whatever reason. My parents are gone. Because I came here then, I learned the rich history of the Italians in this town. Maple Avenue, there are many Italian families who have chosen to stay here. I'm not Italian. I'm a lot of other things, but not Italian. I think something this important should be considered by people who live here and have lived here. Wouldn't this be something we want to vote on as opposed to just making a decision by a few people? That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anyone else want to be heard on this? Please come forward.
Hi, good evening. Liana Maris, 40 Prospect Street. I did take some notes because I did want to make sure that we did open up the discussion, and I really appreciate what President Carroll brought up. As the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, I heard you mention, what is that, DEI? As we started discussing this a couple months ago, part of our conversations were around exactly what you had brought up, that Barrington has been built by Italian Americans, that this is a committee that is hoping to inform the town about how to be more inclusive and how to build that culture of inclusivity. And part of it is that it's not a zero-sum game. So just like you had said, I agree that the spirit of the holiday, the spirit of Columbus Day, is not when it first started, actually 100 years before that, before the lynching of those 11 Sicilian Americans. It was the Tammany Hall in New York City. They had a celebration. It was really actually, we love Columbus. But since then, I would say it's evolved. And it's evolved in a way that stands in solidarity with those who have been harmed, have been killed, have been discriminated against, in the same way that we're talking about the country stood up for the Italian Americans who were persecuted and who were actually publicly lynched at that time. I see this as just a continuum, that we're evolving continually to stand in solidarity with those peoples who have been harmed and have been experiencing marginalization and prejudice, whether here in Barrington or in the world. That I do think that changing the name of Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day makes a very clear statement, puts us in line with the 50 plus other cities and towns and local governments that are doing that throughout the country, but also makes a statement that we here in Barrington are prepared to stand in solidarity with those who have been harmed. And we're ready to take Columbus Day with us, because it's never been about the guy. It's been about standing up for what is right. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please.
Stephen Felix for Western Ave. I think it's useful to go back to the beginning of the meeting when we had the land acknowledgement. We said, we acknowledge that we are in the ancestral homeland of the Pokanoket tribe within the original territory of the Pokanoket Nation. We commit to ongoing efforts to recognize, honor, reconcile, and partner with the Pokanoket people whose ancestral lands and water we benefit from today. And I think I'm standing here in support of changing the name from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And I think it's an opportunity, a twofold opportunity, both to divorce ourselves from a brutal murderer and tyrant, which I think is kind of well accepted and established, as well as an opportunity to honor this commitment to the Pokanoket people that we say at the beginning of each of these monthly town hall meetings. And I think precedent is important too. Liana mentioned the many cities, towns, states that have already taken the step to change the name to Indigenous Peoples Day. And I think thinking about what it means for us, like to me, I see this as the precedent has been set, the path has been set for us. There are a lot of good reasons to make that specific transition. And for us to specifically go out of our way to resist resist that movement to what I see as moving towards some form of justice is making a statement. Not doing it and not moving towards something like Indigenous Peoples Day is just as much making a statement as picking some other name. And I think that's really important considering the lands that we are on. We are on Pokanoket lands that, we're not ours for the taking. We're not the white settlers for the taking. And I think it is important to think about how this can be one important symbolic step towards reconciliation, towards reparations. It's not a big one, it's a symbolic one, but I think it should be taken as an invitation for further learning and education of people in the town, but more importantly to action. Because I think we all continue to participate in Columbus's legacy of colonization. And I think that this is it can be an invitation for us to engage with that and to work against it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Ramachaitis. I was concerned I hadn't heard from you for a few minutes.
Give it a minute. Tom Hermachitis, 1 Howard Street. I kind of agree with this young lady right here. If we're going to create a holiday, make a holiday. Don't take one away. I says, if we're going to start going back in history, are we going to go change Roger Williams Park and change the name of that to something else? Because he was a big person that sold Indians over, if my history serves me correct. I'm not that great at it, but that does stick in my head along with Brown University and all that other stuff. So if we're going to go the whole thing, we got to start looking at all these other things on top of it. But I would go for create Indigenous Day after Thanksgiving and not take away holidays that we already have, or whatever you want to call them. It's up to you. I still say Christmas. Everybody calls it a holiday. I'm Catholic. Mr. Breyer might be Jewish, seeing since he's wearing a yarmulke. So everybody respects everybody in that way. I don't think we're pushing, I think we're pushing away from that. I don't want to be controversial, I'm not like that, but I can't put it out of my head. But I think we should not do away with Columbus Day. Make a new holiday. If we're going to do something about it, then we got to stop with everything else that goes on in the state. History's going to be there, no matter if it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's there. We can only make it better going forward.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Medlin, please.
Again, my name is Braxton Howard Medlin, 19 Commonwealth Avenue, and I serve as the current chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the town of Barrington. These are two of my colleagues on the committee, and about 2 months ago, we spent 2 hours with just on our agenda, our minutes from a previous meeting, Columbus Day, and Victory Day. And I came into the meeting specifically ready to say, no, it's Indigenous Peoples Day. That's it. That's what we'll do. But because we are the DEI committee, we had some different voices in the room, and it took us to 9 o'clock to actually come to a solution that worked for all of us in the room. And it was an incredible example of what it can be like. People can disagree, but still come to a solution. And the young man who just spoke before me said, we can move things forward, keep Barrington moving forward. And that's what Indigenous Peoples Day will do. The DEI committee unanimously recommended that the town rename Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day. Columbus Day, in its current form, does not recognize the violent history of colonization in the Western Hemisphere. We just talked about the fact that it was terrorism, the things that were happening here in the country before we were even thought of. The last word in our committee's name is inclusive, and we feel that Indigenous Peoples Day is more recognizable and representative of the larger group, the larger community. There are 16 states that recognize Columbus Day, and Vermont and Maine, two of our neighbor New England states, actually celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Columbus Day. Whereas I believe the town has out some materials now that say Indigenous Peoples Day / Columbus Day. So that's moving forward already. Indigenous Peoples Day also recognizes the lands on which Barrington, Rhode Island was founded. When the first European settlers arrived, the predominant tribes in Rhode Island were the Narragansett and the Wampanoag. And I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with the Wampanoag. We have already adopted a land acknowledgement. And it's time that we take it a step further. Indigenous Peoples Day. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here wish? Yes, sir, please.
Good evening, Michael Panaswick, 16 Mellon Cove Way. You know, it's probably the most, how can I put it? The lowest of the low here, I'm a white old male. You know, all I hear is, you know, as soon as those old white guys die, everything will be fine. Now, everyone wants to change every holiday, want to change history. You know, I'm for exclusivity, and I just would sort of like things to stay a little bit stable. Now, when people are saying, oh, he's an old white man, when he dies, everything will be fine. I think the people that say that talk about being horrific 500 years ago. I think that's horrific now. Yeah, well, I would say it's horrific, you know. And, yeah, I'd like to keep Columbus Day. I'd like to keep some of the, what can I say, the old values of America. Not saying I don't know that much about Columbus. I don't think anything I could find out would change my feeling. And Columbus Day weekend's always on my birthday. And I love a parade, you know. So now I want to see, like this gentleman said, you don't have to take a holiday away. Put another one in. Don't put another one in, fine. But please leave the holidays that are there. That's all. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Respect my parade.
Thank you. I should point out though that you know there is frequently an argument that we're judging by contemporary standards. Columbus's own contemporaries found him horrific and reported on him. That's that's where we get some of this information that talk about why the kind of man he was. So it was his own contemporaries that really started it, and certainly the history that I was taught, you were taught.
I don't trust these people.
Well,
what's said yesterday, all of a sudden it's changed today.
Well, facts are facts, and we have the writings of himself talking about the people he enslaved and the steps that he went through. So it's not really in doubt, but
we got your mind made up already. I can tell that.
Well, does anyone else want to be heard on this? Is there anyone online, Phil?
No hands are raised.
Okay. Right. Then let's open it up for a council discussion.
You're going to close the public hearing.
Closing the public hearing. Vice President Hahn.
No, thank you. And thanks for all the comments, both tonight and at last month's meeting. President Carroll, you had I think previewed some of your thoughts with respect to the day. Just to put it out there, and my take on things is I am not in favor of changing Columbus Day. That's by no means an indication that he didn't commit atrocities and that he isn't a horrible person in terms of what I think it's fairly unanimous in terms of his history. I think after last meeting, I did a lot of my own independent research and did a lot of reading, especially about the impact of that day on the Italian community, which is a very significant part of this town. And, you know, these comments are not to minimize the DEI committee. I mentioned this at the last meeting. I think the work was terrific, and it sounds like there was a very robust discussion and fruitful discussion that went back and forth, and a lot of people found value in. In my mind, inclusiveness would include the Italian Americans who are in our town, and I would be very hesitant to take that away from them. And I understand that Indigenous peoples is all inclusive and considers all ethnic and cultural backgrounds, including Italian Americans, Native Americans, anybody that you can think of. But I think, you know, this, in my mind, it still is a federal holiday. And as part of my research, you know, just last year, our President Biden issued proclamations for both Columbus Day and for Indigenous Peoples Day. What I was going to propose before tonight was that we make this day a joint day, Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. I do like the proposal that was on the agenda and that you mentioned, President Carroll, about perhaps the day after Thanksgiving would be an appropriate Indigenous Peoples Day. And I'd certainly support that, because I think that's an important day and something to celebrate. But, you know, again, for those reasons, I'm not in favor of changing Columbus Day. Actually, in fact, as Mr. Rimasitis mentioned, not taking away that particular day. I am in favor of adding a day. But I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay. Other members of the council?
I think that one thing I would add to the discussion is that this is also about engaging with history and informing people and acknowledging a present status. Indigenous peoples in this country are currently more likely to live in poverty, less likely to have certain opportunities, and certainly throughout the course of history, we're the subject of genocide on these lands. I think that raising awareness in this way, acknowledging the contributions of Indigenous peoples without diluting it, is the most appropriate action for this council. As far as Columbus goes, I think we all acknowledge that Columbus's history is abhorrent by his own contemporary standards. And I agree, we don't necessarily want to judge historical figures by contemporary standards. That's why we don't rename everything, by the way. That's why you don't look at necessarily someone with the views on gender that an abolitionist who is a contemporary of Lincoln might have, in the same way you look at Jefferson Davis. We do look at the historical context. And in this context, the history we need to be reminded of, acknowledge, and honor would be that of Indigenous peoples. I think that certainly combining the holiday with a / Columbus Day is really dividing that holiday against itself. And I think that sends an extremely mixed message that I wouldn't want to send. That doesn't necessarily suggest any disrespect to the Italian community. I think, as President Carroll alluded to earlier in the meeting, it would be better to pick a different Italian. I married an Italian-Irish American, and I think that I've talked to her about it, and she she certainly agrees with the view that what we need to do, what we need to acknowledge in no uncertain terms, is the contribution to our society and the injustices suffered by Indigenous peoples. And therefore, I would change the name of the holiday to Indigenous Peoples exclusively and follow suit with what other communities in moving in a positive way to acknowledge actual history, not the history we were necessarily taught as young children, in a real way that is a discussion point and a much deserved point of honor.
Thank you. I wanted to respond to some of the comments. As I've said, not here to defend Columbus. And I think Columbus has come to represent, and Columbus Day, the idea of it, has become sort of the focus of a lot of the outrage towards the genocide that was committed against Native Americans and Indigenous peoples, around the world, but especially around here. And that's probably fair. He's probably entitled to be the focus of that, based on what he did. But as I said, I don't think this holiday has really been about him, and it's been about Italian Americans, and they don't deserve to have something taken away from them, in my opinion. I do believe that it is important, and these are symbolic steps, but they're important ones. I do believe it's important to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day, not just, for all the sort of negative reasons of the horrible genocide that was committed against Indigenous peoples, but also because, as we acknowledge at the outset, we are in their ancestral homes. And I think we can do both. We can recognize and honor Indigenous people without taking anything away from an immigrant group that has celebrated its own holiday, essentially. Although it's been called Columbus Day, it's really been about Italian Americans. And I don't think we ought to take it away from Italian Americans. So again, my proposal is, as the state of Colorado has done, to change the name to Mother Cabrini Day, Columbus Day, to Mother Cabrini Day, and to name the day after Thanksgiving to Indigenous Peoples Day. And in that way, we can honor both groups without taking anything away from either. So that's my motion, but I'll let other folks, please.
So I agree with part of what President Carroll said, in that Columbus Day hasn't for a long time really been about Columbus. It's been about Italian American heritage in the eyes of Italian Americans. In the eyes of Indigenous people, it's been about Columbus and what happened to them and their ancestors as a result of that. And I think that's why it's important that that day be Indigenous Peoples Day. It's why I think it's very valuable that the town of Barrington has a DEI committee that can bring together people from many different backgrounds who will draw from different experiences to inform their decisions, because it's easy for each individual person to look at what they know and what they're aware of to inform their decisions. And I think from one perspective, it's absolutely about Italian Americans, and from another perspective, it's about something very, very painful. And for that reason, I believe that it should be Indigenous Peoples Day in October. And I think a good name for the day after Thanksgiving would be Heritage Day, when everybody's heritage can be honored and recognized. for where they come from, their ancestors, their place, their immigration status.
Okay.
May I
Yes,
ask a
please.
question of the DEI committee?
Yep.
I wondered if you could speak a little bit about Victory Day.
Yes. So Victory Day, as we've come to understand, is only still celebrated in the state of Rhode Island. And it stands for Victory Over Japan. So the day that, I won't recount the history just because it is painful. So it celebrates specifically the victory over Japan, and seeing as how we have Japanese Americans in this community, in this state, to celebrate what happened to the Japanese in that kind of manner, it goes along with the things that we were discussing in our meeting about Columbus Day and how that genocide occurred. We talked about the heritage. We talked about the heritage at length, and we looked up, okay, well, if Italian Americans don't have Columbus, then who do they have? And what we talked about was the fact that it's not just Columbus who Italian Americans have as a hero. And Columbus Day is not the only day that Italian Americans have to celebrate their heritage. As a matter of fact, October is Italian American Heritage Month. And October 1st is Italian American Heritage Day. So we already got two things going for Italian Americans in the community, in the state, in the country. And I know I'm standing before the council, standing before everybody here on Zoom as a Black man. However, my fiance is a native of Barrington, and he's Italian. And his memories of being Italian in this community are not the greatest. He lived off of Maple Avenue, and he remembers how his family was treated here just for being immigrants, for being Italian. And it wasn't Columbus Day that made them feel like they belonged in the community. So thank you for asking me to speak about Victory Day, but just wanted to bring it back.
Did you have a recommendation? Did the DEI committee have a recommendation for Victory Day?
We did not get to Victory Day because it does. We are an incredible group of people, and we have a lot of opinions, and we respect each other's opinions, and we want to make sure that we do our research because we know how important DEI is to the community and to the greater good. And we just spend a lot of time talking about how is this going to impact our community? Are we doing the right thing? Do we need to do more research? Do we need to hold more hearings? Do we need to have more listening sessions? So Columbus Day was where we landed.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Please.
As Braxton said, Liana Maris, hi, 40 Prospect Street. I don't know if I have to say that every single time. But as Braxton mentioned, yes, we are, as a committee, we try to embody the values of disagreement in an appropriate manner. And we're actually hoping to bring that to town council meetings as well. But one of the major reasons why we can't move forward without having full discussions is because we're also taking a very close look at what is that experience like for veterans. And a lot of our conversation is around making sure that we don't take away from that experience when we consider the whole picture. So just like Mr. Breyer was saying, that everybody experiences something from a very different perspective around Victory Day, around Indigenous Peoples Day, around Columbus Day, that we just really take into perspective what that is going to be like for people who have survived wars and have fought for our country as well. So we had a little more time on Victory Day, so we said we'll leave that discussion to really fully discuss that. And we invite the public to all of our meetings. We have only been lucky enough to have a couple of meetings that the public have joined, and we're hoping that we can continue that discussion the second Tuesdays of every month.
Thank you.
If I could,
Please.
actually, to that point about the public attending, somebody who spoke at our meeting tonight earlier is actually a person from the community who brought up to the DEI committee at their meeting a couple meetings ago the idea of Victory Day, because their son had come home from learning about it and they learned about it. She's still on now. I don't know if she'd want to speak, but she had brought it up to the committee, so I just thought.
I need to interrupt at this point, and I should have earlier. The
That's
agenda clearly does not have a discussion of Victory Day, and it's tangential, but I think to continue this,
Okay.
I don't want us
That's
to
fine.
run into an open meetings complaint. You can certainly
Okay.
bring it up at a future meeting.
I would like to do that, I think, in the future. I just wanted to go back to say history is obviously contextual. I've lived in a lot of different places, not solely in Rhode Island. This is the first time I've lived in Rhode Island. And I know that there are a lot of statues specifically in the South, which are honoring Confederate generals. And many of those statues were put up as a response to the civil rights movement. And they were not put up in honor of the Confederate generals. They were put on as a fear tactic. Not here, but that happens, right? The history is contextual, and we have a responsibility to move forward in history. I'm married to an old white man. I hope that he doesn't disappear. I think nobody is wishing that anybody goes away or after everybody dies, it's all fine. That's a terrible idea. But I do think that history is contextual, and we have a responsibility to move forward. I work at a children's organization. We do not use Columbus Day. It is not something that is inclusive enough for us to use at a children's organization. I don't think it's inclusive enough for us to use in town. I support changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day because it's what I use in my own personal discussions with my family. What are we doing this weekend? It's Indigenous Peoples Day. I don't necessarily feel the need to change the day following Thanksgiving Day because in my mind, that is, it's a commercial holiday. It's a day that to call it Black Friday would be to really embrace a commercialism that I think should be spent time with family and acknowledging each other. And I don't necessarily think that we need to put a day name on that just to find a day. But I do think it's important to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. I also, at some point, would like to look at other days on the calendar because I do think that those are also, if we're looking at context and history, we need to acknowledge that not a lot of good has come out of nuclear war or genocide or violent ends to world conflict. We're in the middle of one right now. So I support changing Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. I don't necessarily feel a need to change the day following Thanksgiving Day. I don't also necessarily think that Columbus Day, I understand the history of it, but I also know that we have a responsibility to move forward. And we asked our DEI committee to provide guidance to the council for us to make decisions about inclusive language and policies. And so I am interested to hear what they have to say about future days in the future.
Okay, well, I didn't make a motion, but I'll make it clear. I don't know that it's going to get seconded, but I make a motion to change Columbus Day to Mother Cabrini Day and to change the day after Thanksgiving to Indigenous Peoples Day. Is there a second? Okay, hearing none, that motion fails. Does anyone else want to make a motion?
I make a motion to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. So that motion carries 3-2. Now, we have not talked about Thanksgiving Day. Do you want to make a motion on that, or?
That was more if Indigenous Peoples Day was not approved by the council, I would have made a motion to change that.
Okay.
And so I'm comfortable changing its name from day after Thanksgiving to something else, but I don't have a particular.
Okay. So if there are no further motions, we can go on to the next item on the agenda, which is 2022-22, Chapter 33, Personnel Policies. Article 5, attendance and leave, Section 33-29, annual leave. Phil, can you just remind us what this one's about?
This is just cleaning up our ordinances to reflect the fact that additional 5 vacation days that's available to department heads, not any employee, for attendance at more than 12 evening meetings per year. That's been in effect for as long as I have been here, but there's just needs clarification. This amendment would clarify that is exactly what we're doing. So, and the motion itself should be revised to say adopt, and obviously not to delete out that last part as well.
Do you want to read what it should now say?
Oh, I can read that. Sure. That's
just so they can have discussion with the public.
Sure. It would be to adopt ordinance 2022-22, chapter 33, personnel policies, article 5, attendance and leave, section 33-29, annual leave.
So it ended that.
Period.
Okay. So with that, I'm opening the public hearing. Would anyone from the public like to be heard on this item? Phil, is there anyone online who would like to?
Nobody's raising their hand.
Okay, seeing no one here or online, I am closing the public hearing. Any discussion on the council? Does anyone want to, does anyone want to make a motion to adopt ordinance 2022-22, chapter 33, personnel policies, article 5, attendance and leave, section 33-29, annual leave?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Great. Next item on our agenda is the declaration of emergency. As long as the state still has a declared emergency, we are able to maintain our state of emergency. I am opening the public hearing into that. Would anyone like to be heard on that? Is there anyone online who'd like to be heard?
Nobody.
Okay. Hearing none, I'm closing the public hearing. Does anyone want to make that motion?
So moved.
The motion is to adopt 2022-24 renewal of declaration of emergency as presented and made by Vice President Plum, and I will second that. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Next item on our agenda is to discuss and act on resolutions, and the Juneteenth resolution is on there. We've already adopted Juneteenth as our own holiday, but this is a resolution to the General Assembly. Does anyone want to be heard on that? Please.
I had a recommended addition, which would be an additional resolved clause. And be it further resolved that copies of this resolution be sent to the clerks of all cities and towns in Rhode Island, and on January 4th, 2023, to Barrington's members of the Rhode Island General Assembly, the Speaker of the Rhode Island House of Representatives, President of the Rhode Island Senate, and the Governor of the State of Rhode Island. And the reason for that addition being that the people who are in those seats now may very well not be the same people when the General Assembly and state officials are sworn back in.
Mm-hmm.
And so, did I say July?
Yeah.
January.
Oh, January. Okay.
That's what I thought you meant.
Okay. Yeah, so that the people who are holding those seats when the state could take action receive this resolution.
So, Mary, did you already get that?
I don't have it, but I'll
I'll send it to you.
Okay.
I'll repeat it if.
So, any other comments?
President Carroll.
Yes.
Isla, more likely because it's probably past her bedtime. But Isla's mom has her hand raised.
Please, Isla's mom,
Hi.
if you'd like to be
It's
heard.
Isla. It's Isla.
Oh, Isla. Sorry. I'll get it right next time.
That's okay. I apologize. I actually raised my hand for the state of Rhode Island emergency, but I think I raised it too late. My fingers couldn't hit raise hand quick enough. One quick thing about the state of emergency, Rhode Island has not renewed as of today. So it expired on September 30th of 2022, and the governor has not renewed it since. He signed it on September 16th, and it was expiring the 30th, and it is October 3rd. He has not renewed it. Just as an FYI, the state has not renewed it. So I just would like to point out, like, why are we in a state of emergency? There's nothing to be.
Yeah, I might be able to help you. There's still, President Biden has not yet unrenewed the emergency. I think it's supposed to go to February of 2023. No harm, no foul, because if we can get federal funds still, we will. So my suggestion, you voted on it. It's good to hear that the information, I actually wasn't aware of that, but I think you're fine.
It's through October 12th.
Is it October 12th?
The current Rhode Island state of emergency, Executive Order 22-33 from September 16th, 2022, states that this order shall take effect immediately and remain in full force and effect through October 12th, 2022, unless renewed, modified, or a subsequent order.
Right, and it might be renewed. So I think you're good with the action you took.
Thank you. Okay, the next, did we pass
that?
We didn't vote on the state of emergency yet.
No, we did.
We did.
Okay, sorry, we're on resolutions. And we made a change to the resolution, but we haven't voted on that, right?
Correct.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to adopt the resolution as presented and amended?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Next resolution is for a fee and fine schedule. This is to eliminate the civic nonprofit charging admission for library meeting rooms, gallery, and the auditorium. Any questions or concerns on that?
I had a question. Does the library have a policy in place where outside organizations are hosting something at the library that the literature, the promotional material for outside organizations indicates that it's not a library or town event, that it's a private event?
Chris Chin, is she on? I don't see her.
Oh, Siobhan's here. Siobhan's here. I can.
Okay, Siobhan, could you help us with that? Is it?
Hello?
Yes. Hello, Siobhan.
Hi. This is Chris.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
I must be on, I don't know why I'm on Siobhan's, but I am.
Sorry.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Can you repeat that question? It's late.
I wondered if the library has a policy where if outside organizations are holding events at the library just because they've reserved the room, is there anything on their promotional material that indicates that it is not a library event or that it is not a town event?
If an outside organization holds a program that is not the library's, we do not advertise it. They can advertise that they are having, obviously they're going to advertise where their program is. In our policies, we do say that we don't, the fact that we're having, we're allowing a program to take place in our library does not mean that we endorse that program. I think maybe you're getting at the Cranston issue.
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't want to do anything that would inhibit any organization's ability to have an event,
right.
But it might be worth considering whether outside organizations promoting events at the library are asked to include a disclaimer on their promotional materials that just say this is not a library sponsored event or something to that effect.
I suppose that we could. It is something, I think that, it's been a long time since a group has had something at our library, but I'm, like I said, again, it's in our policies that we don't endorse, that this is not our program and we don't endorse. Whether or not we actually state that, or they would actually have to state that on their advertising, because we just simply would not advertise. And by virtue of the fact that it is at the library, I can see where, yeah, that would be kind of construed, misconstrued as being endorsed by the library. But since we would not be advertising that, I don't see a place where we would put whether or not we endorsed it.
Well, I actually thought it would be the outside organization. So in lieu of paying a fee, you know, they're able to hold an event for free, and the library asks them to include in their promotional material that it is not a library or town event.
I suppose that is something.
Chris, should we make a motion to add this to the agenda for
You know,
discussion?
I understand. Jacob just made the link between not charging and putting that information. So I'm comfortable now since.
Fine. I just didn't want us to.
No, I was about to say something, but you just made the link. You're basically saying if you're not going to charge admission for the use, if you're an outside group, you'd like the library in return to consider having them place a statement that basically says this is not library supported event.
Yeah, and I support this motion without that being part of the motion. I just wanted to
put it out there. Maybe the board can discuss it.
Yeah, we don't really have oversight to the library. I just wanted to surface the thought.
Okay, we will take that into consideration.
Thank you.
I'll bring that to the next board meeting. It's a good point.
Okay. Any further discussion on this? Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the resolution amending the town's fee and fine schedule as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Next item on our agenda is to discuss and act on the Masiello estate vote. Phil, are you going to take us through this?
Kathy run with that. Or
Kathy?
Mike, but it looks like Mike was okay. Kathy, yes.
I'm here.
Oh, great. Please go ahead.
All councilors should have received a memo from me outlining 3 items that would be in jeopardy if you tried to put into the Spencer Trust Fund. The bereavement, the benefit of bereaved children would not be able to be achieved. It would have to be the purpose of the Amy Spencer Trust. Also, the contributions could not be removed once they go into the trust, and there could be tax ramifications. So I'm suggesting that the December 6th vote in 2021 be rescinded and that the funds remain in a special revenue account, which would account for the benefit of bereaved children, as was requested at the December 6th council meeting.
Okay. So essentially, our auditors have flagged an important issue on this that Kathy has described. And so this would be essentially to continue the purpose of those, but to maintain them in a special revenue fund that the town council would administer. So any questions or concerns on that? Please.
A question, and sorry for missing earlier, but would this still be able to fall under the purview of the contracted position of the Spencer Trust administrator? It's not Spencer Trust funds, but
Yeah, I don't see why not.
That could just be another duty that the manager could assign.
just so it doesn't add more burden to the town hall staff, but can still move forward in the way that Councilor Conway had proposed and that the council supports.
All right, we can just identify that in the job description or in the contract.
We can make that clear in the RFP for consultant services.
Great.
I think that'd be one of the best.
Mr. Ursillo, you're certain there'd be no conflict of interest there or possible
I don't think there would be a conflict of interest.
Seriously with the trust.
Yeah, because and I didn't have the opportunity to talk to the Washington Trust lawyers today, and I just got back today. I think one of the issues is that not all bereaved children are poor or impoverished, et cetera, and that would cause a conflict with spending on the Spencer Trust funds. I think what would have to happen is that any time spent by this new position on this specific different fund could not be paid for out of revenues from Spencer Trust. It would have to come out of other town revenues.
Right, that's what I'm worried about.
But my guess is, though, that this would be hopefully very infrequent, and wouldn't really be a very burdensome. But clearly, any time associated with a special revenue fund would not be paid for with Spencer Trust funds.
Right, because we would be violating the purpose of the trust. In fact, we use this person to.
There you go. And if not, we can talk about it. It could also be handled administratively. I mean, this is probably something unlike the Spencer Trust, where there are many issues that come up on a regular basis. This probably would not come up all that often.
Right. God willing. I guess I'm fine with this if there's concern with the auditors. I think it's hard to argue that a child who lost a parent is not unfortunate.
I agree.
But if the auditors are concerned about it rather than take any risk, I think we can find a way to do it this way too.
I don't want to mislead you. The auditors aren't concerned with it. The auditors questioned if the funds had been transferred from the town to the Amy Spencer Trust Fund. And I had said no. I was erroneously wrong on even that they were supposed to be transferred. I know in November at the town council meeting, I think Annalise and Carl had mentioned that they didn't want to put it into Spencer Trust. And then when it did in December, I don't know if I fell asleep during the meeting, but I was saying, no, they're not supposed to get transferred to the Spencer Trust Fund. When I went back and looked at the tape, and they were. At that point, I said, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't say anything, because the trust is for a specific purpose. And once it's put in there, it can't be reversed for future town councils. So all we want to do is what you people wanted to do at the original December 6th meeting, which was for the bereaved children. And you wanted other councilors to be able to change the way those funds were used if they so choose.
So, this wouldn't change the intent, our intent. It would only change the location and wouldn't change the people who decided. It would change the administrator. I'm fine with this. I wanted to be clear that I don't think, I think it's the definition is broad enough to include more than that, but it doesn't create any kind of legal precedent. Or anything.
I agree with you on that, for sure.
Yeah. But, okay, any other questions, concerns? Does anyone want to make a motion to override the vote on December 6, 2021 as regards the transfer of funds, and to vote to maintain the funds in the special revenue fund? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded.
Could you just use the term rescind in that motion instead?
Okay.
Just use the
To
term
rescind the vote on December 6, 2021, as regards the placement of the funds, and to vote to maintain the funds in a special revenue fund.
Still so moved.
Okay, and is there a second?
Second.
Second made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is to set the agenda for Monday, November 7th at 7 p.m. And we're going to have Ned Barton back. Hopefully he's made some progress with the Rhode Island Country Club. We're going to be talking about fiber optics with Kathy. We have a presentation from the Bay team. We will be discussing the Carmelite Monastery in light of the recent report on funding, ARPA priorities and funding, So discuss and act on resolutions, business registration, we can talk more about that. Public hearing on the use of town hall for town hall business hours and for stop intersections. These are ones that and for signs. These are ones that we put off for our for this November meeting. Is there anything else anyone would like to add to the agenda for the 23rd, for the November 7th meeting?
Well, the cannabis ordinance.
Cannabis ordinance, right? Anything else? Obviously, if anything comes up, feel free to give me a call and I will put it on the agenda. Okay. Next item on our agenda is to move into executive session. We will lead this meeting in.
Sorry, Council.
Phil has just advised me that we will have to make continuous executive session to a subsequent meeting because we are not ready to move forward at this point with this particular contract.
Do we need to do anything? Do we need to take a vote?
Actually, you don't need to do anything because we could just add this to the next agenda, depending on when they take a vote.
Okay, that sounds great.
So now the only motion in order would be to adjourn.
Does anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Made and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
It's not even 10:30 though. How can we adjourn?